good afternoon, Notre Dame fans, and welcome to another edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. I am Vince D'Addario. I am the football analyst here at irishbreakdown.com, and with me, as always, is Brian Driscoll. He is the publisher here at irishbreakdown.com, and he is feverishly taking notes over there, which always worries me. It's like being in the principal's office, and they're just like writing all the time. Like, what are you writing
It's
about
like
me?
all the things like, okay, his shirt's not right. Can't see the logo.
I know, right? But I got to show off my merch.
Okay.
Just got it yesterday. I got the long sleeve navy with the IB on it. And let me tell you, this is one of the most comfortable long sleeve shirts I've ever owned because it's a little bit lighter fabric.
Intentional.
So it's not like the dry fit fabric, but it's not like the heavy long sleeve either. It's a happy medium, man, and I dig it. So want to make sure everybody out there gets one of these because it's great. It's like 80 degrees today, but I'm totally comfortable in this long sleeve. So just throwing that out there, you know, in case anybody wants to pick one up. You can
Vince,
check out
Notre Dame had a big recruiting weekend. They do not care about our merchandise today. They want to get to recruiting. Am I right? Am I right, everybody? We can talk about the merch later.
Yeah, you know. See, Mike, look, Mike is on board. Just be patient. Let the coaches work their magic. I assume he's talking about us, and even though he's not. But I'm going to say he's talking about us, and we're going to work our magic, so don't worry.
You keep telling yourself that.
Yeah, I know. All right, well, yes, it was a very big recruiting weekend, Brian, and that is why this show is – Mondays are not normally a recruiting show for us. But after a weekend like Notre Dame just had, we really didn't have a choice. So we are going to talk about this weekend. You know, obviously you went over it last week, 9 guys on campus, huge weekend for the 22 class. Brian, I'll let you take it from here.
No, it was. Look, this was a huge weekend for Notre Dame in a lot of ways, and I think overall it was a success. Everyone that I've talked to said, for the most part, there's only really one exception from what I've gotten into, and even then, it wasn't necessarily that it didn't go well. They just didn't make up the ground they need to make up.
Just close it a little bit,
right?
Yeah.
But overall, I think it was a great weekend from the prospects I've talked to, from the sources that I've talked to on both sides of things. It sounds like it went really well, and you know, it was an incredibly important weekend because you had arguably your highest impact players. I mean, if you just look at the list, so Tobias Merriweather is the number 1 ranked receiver on my board. Junior Tuihalamaka is the number 1 pure Mike on my board. Billy Schrouth is the number 1 guard on my board. Anthony Lucas is the number 1 defensive lineman on my board, much less interior player. Benjamin Morrison and Devin Moore are the top 2 cornerbacks left on the board. I mean, just hands down. Dallin Hayden is my number 1 running back on the board, and Jake Taylor is my number 1 offensive tackle on the board. So it wasn't just that it was the first weekend of visits. This is where your impact, for the most part, this is where your impact is going to come from. Now, Jalen Sneed is on campus starting today for his visit. We will talk about that as well at the end.
Okay.
So after we wrap up the guys on campus, I got some nuggets about Jalen Sneed and where things stand there that we talked about in an article today at irishbreakdown.com. But we'll get into that a little bit too at the very end of things. So, but let's first kind of dive in, Vince.
Let's do it
with kind of the overall view of the weekend. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, one thing I want to, because you kind of just talked about who was on campus, and we talked about that a lot. You know, last week going into it, you had that cool graphic, had everybody up there. But I want to ask you this question. You mentioned something on Twitter, and I want to follow up on it. You said that if you knew that all the prospects that were here this weekend were going to commit to Notre Dame,
including Jalen Sneed on Monday.
Okay, including Jalen Sneed.
Like that consecutive visit period, yeah.
And that nobody else was going to commit after this, that you would be happy. You got to explain that to me. Then that makes a pretty small class.
I had someone. Well, not really, because there are 14 now, and there's 10 guys on campus.
That's true.
Like 9 you're right. This weekend plus Jalen Sneed, that gets you to 24. So somebody sent me an email asking me. It was actually posed to me by one of our listeners. He sent me an email this weekend, and he said, you know, if I told you that Notre Dame could only get the 9 guys from this weekend plus Jalen Sneed, and then the rest of the class would be filled out with nothing but Plan B and Plan C guys, would you take it? My first thought was no, because then I start thinking about who's coming on campus. And Xavier Nwankpa's on campus. There's no C.J. Williams on campus this weekend. There's no Xavier Bradshaw. And I started thinking like, I wouldn't take that. That was my gut reaction. And then I wrote out the class. And and then I was like, wait a minute, like they're a receiver short from their numbers, right? Of what I'd like to see. But other than that, that's a home run class. That's a top 5 class, because you'd have Angeli at quarterback, you'd have Dallin Hayden and Jadarian Price at running back, you'd have Tobias Merriweather and Namorian Walker at receiver, which again would be the one area where they'd come up short. It would be the 2 tight ends that are already in the class. Joey Tanona, Ty Chandler are in the class, plus you'd add Jake Taylor and Billy Schrouth. That's a great offensive line class. You've got the 3 DNs in the class, plus Donovan Heinisch, and then you'd add arguably my number 1 overall player on the entire board in Anthony Lucas. You'd have Josh Burnham, Nolan Ziegler that are already in the class, plus Junior Tuihalamaka and Jalen Sneed. You'd have Jaden Mickey at corner, plus you'd add Devin Moore and Benjamin Morrison. You'd have Jake Pope at safety. I started thinking, like, yeah, that's a heck of a class. Like, that's an outstanding class. I mean, again, it'd be 1 receiver short of an elite class.
Okay,
that would be it. And then after that, it would be, man, it would be a great class. Now, again, I don't think that's going to happen. Sure. But it was an interesting question.
Batting 1,000 with all those guys,
and it'd be incredibly difficult.
Yeah,
especially since there's several prospects that you came into the weekend trailing. And I know for now, looking back, at least 1 prospect they weren't able to make up the ground, from what my sources said with the leader, and he hasn't even visited his leader yet.
That's not good. Okay, so give me big picture where we're at coming out of this weekend, and then you want to jump into like individually how things went. So
kind of start with defense and I mean, look, overall, I think it was a successful weekend. I think it was I think the first weekend there's always going to be. This isn't something I'm heard. This is just me talking from experience. The first weekend, especially with new people on the staff, first time going through, there's always a little bit of a learning curve, which is why it was probably good that it was a smaller class. Again, that's not any sourced information. That's just my opinion, having been a recruiting coordinator and had to lead, these kind of weekends, and because they haven't had kids on campus for so long. But from everything I've been told, from talking to recruits, talking to parents, talking to people on the Notre Dame side of things, talking to, people that are talking to people, that are pretty connected. I mean, everyone that I've talked to has said, for the most part, this was a very successful weekend. With one exception, Notre Dame was basically able to say, hey, look, if they don't pick us, there's really nothing else we could have done from this weekend to change that. I think that's kind of where you look at it. There was a lot of excitement about how the weekend went. There was you had Josh Burnham came on campus this weekend. Obviously, he was a committed player. It was good to have him on campus this weekend. There was a picture of him and Junior Tuihalamaka together. Josh Burnham is filling out. And I talked to somebody who said he's about 6'4" now, and he's 221 pounds. And that's just coming after basketball season. So he is a really impressive. He made Marcus Freeman look small. And let's not forget, Marcus Freeman played linebacker in the National Football League.
Right.
Okay, this isn't just like some dude that was like is a really good coach but wasn't much of a player. I mean, he's towering over him and Junior Tuihalamaka. So that's kind of where they were there. I think defensively, it was an especially successful weekend. Now,
I can't say
they didn't get any public commitments, right?
Sure.
And I think, but we kind of said I think maybe they might get 2 this weekend. But I also have said Notre Dame does not push kids to commit during visits. We have to remind people of that. That's not Notre Dame style. And what we have found in the past is when Notre Dame has done that occasionally,
it's backfired on
it's backfired a little bit. That kid will end up taking visits or things like that. It's like, look, we'd rather wait 2 weeks to get your commitment and then it be solid than to get it now and then you decide in the fall you want to take visits.
I love. I personally love that because, look, these are kids we're talking about.
Right.
And it's very easy.
Who have not been able to visit a campus officially in over a year and a half.
And it's easy to get overwhelmed at an official visit because they're literally rolling out the red carpet for you. So it's easy to have a coach, kind of get in your grill a little bit and be like, hey, man, now's the time, and be persuaded like that. Yeah. And so I really like that approach because when they do commit, then it's real.
But I do think when you look at the defensive players first, and we'll begin there,
I do think
that Notre Dame definitely put their best foot forward. I would argue that coming into the weekend, I said I think Notre Dame's going to get at least 6 commitments from this weekend, meaning eventually these kids will commit and end up with Notre Dame.
6 out of the 9 or
6 out of the 9. 6 out of the 9, not including Jalen Sneed.
Okay.
And as I look at my list, that has not changed for me. That number has not changed for me, and I'm a little bit more confident that number will grow as opposed to decrease.
Okay.
So,
all right.
That's a successful weekend. And so, again, my expectations weren't necessarily that guys would pop this weekend, but I do think they put themselves in position with some of these guys that they're going to be incredibly, incredibly hard to beat.
Yeah. No, I absolutely.
Defensively.
Yes. So let's start on the defensive side of the ball. Your number one guy on the board, Anthony Lucas.
Mm-hmm.
I saw a picture of him with his parents, and his parents hit the genetic lottery on that one because he towers over both of them.
Yeah.
And I mean, he's a special looking dude. There is no doubt about that. But what have you been hearing about his visit?
Well, it went from everything. I haven't had a chance to talk to Anthony yet, but from the sources I've talked to multiple sources about how his visit went. It sounds like it went great. Notre Dame was able to kind of show him, here's what makes us different, right? And that pitch is going to work really, really well with Anthony and his family. This is a family, and I've been saying this for a long time. This is a family that's looking for something different than most power programs. That's just a fact. The education part is important in this family. I've been saying this for a while. This is part of the reason I felt really confident about where Notre Dame stood with Anthony Lucas for a while. Notre Dame was able to show that. They were able to show, like, look, this is what this brand can do for you, not just football-wise, which you're selling the fact that you've had, your first playoff team had 5 defensive linemen get picked from that unit, and there's still a few more left still on the team that haven't finished their careers yet, right?
You're right.
You look at Jerry Tillery was a first-round draft pick recently. You look at the 4 defensive ends that were first-round draft picks. The other thing that was very interesting, and I've talked to a couple sources about this, Notre Dame, and remember what we've talked about with Anthony Lucas, how he fits in so well because he can play 3 technique and play on the edge. What I'm told is Marcus Freeman and Mike Elson did a great job of showing him the edge part of what he's going to do. They're not saying you won't play inside, but they're saying, like, this is how, which again leads to, this is a little bit of a team nugget. If you're going to play Anthony Lucas on the edge, that tells me that Notre Dame is in fact leading towards being more of a 3-down team in the future.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Yep.
And we've talked about that's what makes him such a great fit for this defense, and they hit that absolutely out of the park with him. Is look, there's not a defense you're going to play in that's going to offer you more versatility and flexibility than this one. Which, if you're Anthony Lucas, you're looking at it and you're saying, okay, which means when I go to the NFL, number one, I'm going to have a Notre Dame degree. Number two, I'm going to play in a defense that tells 4-3 teams, hey, I can play 3 tech for you. Maybe some 4-down teams that like a really big power end, like the Seahawks.
Sure.
Hey, I can play a power end for you. And if you're a 3-down team, and there's a lot of 3-down teams in the NFL still, I can play 5 technique. That's what this defense is going to give him. And I don't know if there's another defense that's on his board that can give him that kind of versatility just from who they are.
Sure.
They don't have to change. And this is the thing that they were able to show. We're not going to change our defense necessarily for you. This is who we are.
And this is why you fit so well into it. Yeah.
And they knocked that out of the park. Plus, obviously, with the parents, I heard that the parents had just really enjoyed the visit. Really great people. They really made a strong impact with people on campus in just their character, their priorities, the things they're looking for as a family. And Brian Kelly has mentioned in the past that that's important to Notre Dame. It's not just the kid. What kind of family are we bringing in this program?
Absolutely.
And with Anthony Lucas, it literally just checked every single box with him. And then Notre Dame checked every single box. Now, we've also said this is not a recruitment that's necessarily going to end anytime soon. But I think from what I'm told in my sources, Notre Dame has put themselves in position where if they can continue to keep doing what they're doing, they're going to be very hard to beat in that recruitment.
Excellent. Well, that's good news. So staying on the defensive side of the ball, I butcher his name all the time, but Junior Tuihalamaka, right? Yep. I'm going to get that down. It's like
you can say the Clemson quarterback's name, but you can't say Tuihalamaka.
I know, right? I'm going to get it. It's practice. Practice makes perfect.
Okay.
But anyway, how did his go? Because I felt like when was it that he decommitted from someplace and then
he decommitted from USC shortly after Notre Dame offered him,
and it felt very much like he was a Notre Dame lean at that point. But then it kind of went. He didn't obviously commit. Wanted to see the campus, and I don't blame him. So where are things with him?
Notre Dame crushed it with him. And look, Texas has done you're correct. He was a USC commit. The Notre Dame staff offered him, Stanford offered him, and he decommitted. Okay, that should tell you something about what Junior Tuihalamaka is looking for.
Correct.
Okay,
I agree.
In a program, and it's not just where can I make a lot of tackles.
Right.
Okay,
right.
When Stanford
Absolutely.
and Notre Dame influence your recruitment, that tells you something.
Yep.
Texas has done a great job pushing for him and making him feel like a priority. He visited Texas last weekend, and even though Texas has narrowed the gap, Notre Dame to me remained his clear leader. It was basically, could you really seal the deal this weekend? Now, I'm supposed to talk to Junior later this afternoon, one-on-one, but talking to sources, it couldn't have gone better. He is the one guy that on the defensive side of the ball, if I could only pick one guy that I'm absolutely positive Notre Dame is just going to be incredibly difficult to beat for, it would be Junior Tuihalamaka. And Josh Burnham being on campus was a big part of that too. And that's part of the reason Josh Burnham was on campus this weekend for an unofficial visit.
Not a coincidence.
Right. And so that part of it, and then having them on campus together, because one of the concerns is, could teams use Burnham to negatively recruit Tuihalamaka? Meaning, well, they already got Josh Burnham and he's a Mike.
Right.
So Marcus Freeman's got those two kids together, and he's showing how Josh can play, which is what we've been saying since the kid committed. Josh can play everywhere. He can play Sam, he can play Mike, he can play Will, he can play Viper. You saw how long he's like a pterodactyl. You saw how long he is in those pictures that we saw.
Yeah.
Josh can play all over, which means those two guys can play together.
Absolutely.
And obviously Nolan Ziegler, it's not even the conversation because he's an outside, he's a rover, kind of guy. So you can't use that when Nolan's a completely different type of player. But with Josh, it's kind of like, well, are you guys going to be in the same position? And having them on campus together and show that, hey, you guys aren't going to battle each other. You guys are going to complement each other. I think it was a really, really big thing.
That's beautiful.
So it could have gone better with Junior Tuihalamaka.
Yeah, I like the way that they frame that out. That's so smart. Yeah. And then to get both guys in the room at the same time. That way there's no, telephone game. You know what I mean? As far as
a lot of these kids haven't met each other before too. That's the other thing. Like I know that Josh and Junior have talked. I know that Nolan Ziegler and all those guys have been talking, but they have never met before. Yeah. And so it was nice to be able to get them down.
All right, so let's move to the secondary. Cornerbacks, Benjamin Morrison, Devin Moore, both on campus together, which is always interesting. But you're always looking for more than one corner. So how do they go with those two?
They'd like to have three in this class is what they're looking for. So they've already got Jaden Mickey in the class. These are two guys that are must-gets for Notre Dame. They're absolute must-gets. This is the key, in my opinion, to really finishing off the secondary class the way it needs to be. From what I understand, it went really well with both. I talked to sources in Notre Dame. There's a lot of confidence in Notre Dame that they're going to be hard to beat for these two guys. Now the other thing is they from what I'm told, and again, I'm still trying to get more info on this, is that Notre Dame actually encouraged them to take the visits that are left on their dockets for the reasons we talked about. And we've heard this before in interviews we've done with guys with Brian Kelly, where they've kind of said, hey, look, go on these visits. Give yourself something compared Notre Dame to.
Sure.
I think Notre Dame is really from this is probably coming from four different sources as far as hearing this. It sounds like Notre Dame is really aware of the uniqueness of the current visit schedule, meaning these kids have not been to places before.
Sure.
You have to be really careful that you're not riding emotion, because in 3 months that emotion is going to be gone and there's going to be regrets and
absolutely,
second guessing and things like that.
Absolutely.
When we'd rather you commit late June, early July than commit now and flip. But
that doesn't it show a confidence in what they're bringing to the table?
I think it does.
Too?
I think defensively for sure it does. It's like, look, we know where we're at. We've made our pitch. We're very confident where these things stand, and it sounds like they hit it. I've heard perfect, excellent, great. Those are the things I'm hearing about how the visit went with those two corners. Now, I believe that Benjamin Morrison is going to be going to Washington soon. Devin Moore is going to visit Cincinnati. He's talked about possibly visiting Stanford. So I have a feeling both of these could end up dragging into late June.
Sure.
Now, with Benjamin Morrison, I'm pretty confident that it's gonna end this summer. Devin Moore's still the one that I'm a little nervous about in regards to, can Notre Dame close it this summer? Because if that one drags into the fall, as I've said all along, I'm going to be a little nervous. It sounds like Notre Dame did everything possible to kind of show what's different about their program. Again, Notre Dame has done a great job, especially defensively, of showing how we're different. than everybody else.
Yeah, for sure.
And look, we can roll out the red carpet. We can put on a light show. We can do all those type of things. But at the end of the day, that's not going to get you in the NFL. That's not going to get you championships. That's not going to get you a degree.
Yep.
Right. And that doesn't mean they didn't show these kids love. It's just that Notre Dame did a great job of selling what makes them unique. And I think there's nowhere that's happening better than on the defensive side of the ball right now. So there's still some work to do with both guys, but Notre Dame comes out of this visit, in my view, talking to sources, as the clear leader for both players. And not just the leader, like, okay, they're here and everybody else is here. Like, they're here and somebody's going to have to really blow these kids away.
Okay. Well, that's good.
Opinion. Now, that can happen, right?
Absolutely, it can happen.
But I think that right now Notre Dame's in position to really close effectively on these guys.
Okay. Well, let's stay in the secondary. Jake Pope was on campus. He's a safety. What are you hearing about him?
This is an interesting one. So everything that I'm hearing about Jake Pope went great, made a great impression on him, really connected with the coaching staff. They showed him how wonderful it is and all that.
Sure.
And I've gotten texts saying, like, 24/7's putting crystal balls up. And that's not a knock on them. I get why they're doing that because of what they're hearing, what I'm hearing.
Sure.
My only concern is everything that I'm hearing about how the Notre Dame visit went is exactly what I heard a week ago coming out of the North Carolina visit. Great, unlike anything he's ever seen. And there were crystal balls going in for North Carolina last week.
And now they're flipping to Notre Dame because they're hearing the same
And
stuff.
he's going to Ohio State next week. And he's going to Alabama the week after that. So I think Notre Dame did a great job with Jake Pope. I think I think he genuinely came out of his visit blown away by Notre Dame. Okay, so I don't want to dispel that at all, which is, again, when people are telling me that 247 is putting crystal balls up for him, I get it. Totally get it. It's just, for me, I get nervous when I hear kids kind of say that go to visits. And I think I always remember Lydell Ross. Remember him?
No.
He was a kid that ended up at Florida, but he committed to Notre Dame, Ohio State. And so basically, like, whoever he visited last is where he was going to commit and sign with, essentially.
Really?
And so I always get a little nervous when you hear just rave reviews from a kid after every visit.
Sure.
And so I think that Notre Dame has put themselves in a great position with Jake Ross. I think, however, I blew it away. Scheme fit, check. Position coach, Jake Pope. Position fit, check. They talked to him about playing both sides of the ball. He met with Tommy Rees as well. They're selling that part to him. You look at the connection with Chris O'Leary, the position coach, check. Marcus Freeman, check. All that's a check. So I think they did a great job with Jake Pope. My only concern is, however, I think there's going to be a lot more closing that's going to be needed on him than the other two guys. Meaning, I'm a lot more nervous that in a week from now he's going to be saying the same thing about Ohio State.
Sure,
that he said about Notre Dame. So yes,
Alabama.
I think Notre Dame made a major move with Jake Pope, but I think they might need to try to get him back on campus again. I think that might be an important thing. I'm not as confident. Again, if you were to tell me, do you think there's this leader? I'd say as of today, I think Notre Dame has emerged as a leader for Jake Pope. I'm just not as confident that it's going to stay that way as I am about the two corners. And about Junior Tuihalamaka.
Where's Jake Pope from? If you're trying to get him back,
Buford High School in Georgia.
In Georgia, so that's a decent hike to come back on your own dime.
And he's played it. I mean, he's visited Georgia as well, not officially, but unofficially. Georgia's a player there too.
Okay.
But right now, I think Notre Dame has put themselves in pole position. Now they're just going to have to fend off Ohio State and Alabama. Now, the good thing about Ohio State is Ohio State already has one safety committed, Kai Stokes from Florida. There's a lot of rumblings that they're going to get another safety here soon, the kid from Nevada. And then, of course, they're still trying to recruit Xavier Nwankpa. So I don't even know if Ohio State's going to have room for Jake Pope when it comes his time to make a decision, which could help Notre Dame. I don't know where Alabama is with. I don't have any clue where they stand with him. Is he a take? Is he not a take? I would imagine so. If they're bringing him in for an official visit, I'd imagine he's a take in Alabama, which should tell you everything you need to know about Jake Pope.
How good he is,
You can look at the 3-star ranking, or you can say he's taking visits to Ohio State, Notre Dame, and Alabama.
Right.
Those three schools don't all bring in a lot of 3-star kids, right? Yep. I mean, it's just the reality of it. So he's a very talented player, very athletic safety, very rangy. not a real big kid, but he's a thumper. I mean, he'll come down and smack you.
Yeah.
But I really like his range. I really like his athleticism. His short area burst is outstanding. He's an instinctive player. He is a very strong all-around football player, and I like where Notre Dame stands today. I just want to make sure that I'm clear. I think Notre Dame did a tremendous job with Jake Pope. I think Notre Dame came out of the visit with Jake Pope as the leader. I'm just saying I need to hear that.
Sure.
I need to see when he visits Ohio State and Alabama that it's not just the same things.
The same rhetoric over and over again.
Yeah.
And I get that, and I get why. If that's what he's doing, I get it. I totally get it. Keeping people off balance, and doesn't want to say bad things about
I don't think it's that. Honestly, I don't think it's that. I just think
he just legitimately enjoyed all the visits.
Yeah, I think because again, it's this is what I've been saying for a while. Most of these kids have not been able to take visits anywhere.
So they have,
And when they were freshmen or sophomores, and they were like the 50th kid on the list because they were focusing on the 20 and 21.
Because they were younger,
right?
Yeah, right.
And so these kids are. It's gonna. A lot of this is when he visited North Carolina, it was his first ever official visit.
Yeah,
that's a great staff. I mean, if Dre Bly's talking to you, like Dre Bly, holy moly, Dre Bly was an All-American in North Carolina, great player. Their DB coach, Jay Bateman, their D coordinator. Mac Brown's a legend. He's a future Hall of Famer. He's got a national title ring, And so I think they made a great impression. I think Notre Dame made a great impression. I think that he's a kid that this is what's going to happen with some of these kids. You think everything's is one way based on how the relationship's been, but then these visits, and this is what I've been saying for a while, these visits are going to tell us a lot more about where things are going to go than normal. Because usually when kids make these summer visits, it's their second, sometimes third time on a campus. With most of these kids,
this might be the one and only.
Yeah, it's their first time.
Yeah.
It's not true of all the kids, but it is true with most of these kids.
Absolutely. All right, so let's flip to the other side of the ball, and we'll start with the running back, right? We'll start with Dallin Hayden.
Yeah.
How did things go with him?
Great. Now, we're not going to talk much about Tobias Merriweather, Billy Schrouth, because I just haven't got a lot of new info on them other than everything I thought going in is still what I believe coming out, which is that I think Notre Dame's in great position with both of them.
Position for both.
Yeah. But I just haven't got as much intel on those. But Dallin Hayden, I think the visit went awesome. I had a chance to sit down and talk with him last night. He's a really, really sharp kid. I thought it was awesome that his dad, who played at Tennessee, was wearing an orange shirt during this visit. I think that was great. I thought that was awesome.
Was it logoed? Was it Tennessee?
No,
it
was
just an orange shirt.
It was, yeah. Okay. Tennessee's not a factor for Dallin. Okay. I just thought that was cool. I just thought that was awesome. Exactly. I thought it was great. I would do
the same thing. I would do the same thing, man. I think that's hilarious.
But they went great. Mom and dad were on the visit. From what I'm told, family really likes Lance Taylor. Not
hard to do.
And so
he's an easy guy to like.
Exactly. This was their first chance to kind of meet him in person, face to face, sit down with him, and that connection only strengthened.
Sure.
He had a chance to sit down with Lance Taylor and Tommy Rees and talk offense. And this is really where I think Notre Dame really, really did a great job. So one of the things that Notre Dame emphasized was, let's talk about your skill set, Dallin. You've got great vision, great technique, great footwork. You make great reads. All those things, and they kind of break down his game and showed that's our offense, right? And that's what he talked about. If you go read the interview that we did with him last night, he was talking about how I really feel like I fit that offense really well. And the reality is if you look at the other school that's the factor here, it's Ohio State. Ohio State runs a different offense. They don't run the same offense as Notre Dame. It's a lot more counters, wraps, and more man schemes than the zone schemes. And I'm going to read you a quote from Dallin to kind of back up what he said. He said, they say I fit their offense and what they want at the position, they et cetera, character. Then he says, Notre Dame runs a lot of zone and a lot of what I run now in high school. That's a big part of what I'm looking for there. It's very similar to what I'm doing now. I really fit their offense. I feel like I run the zone very well. It fits my style. And I think that's very, very important because that is something that does stand different from what his other competitors are for. I mean, sure. Illinois is going to run more man gap schemes than Notre Dame. And that's the selling point that they said to him. I think they also – Dallin is he's not your typical – when people think big-time running back prospect, I think there's these stigmas that often get made about running back prospects. A little flashier, a little pizzazz, things like that. Complete opposite of Dallin Hayden. I asked him about, what are you going to do for your – I'll probably just put something on social. Whenever he makes his commitment to wherever he's going to go, he didn't say where because he hasn't decided yet.
Sure.
You can have a ceremony. He's like, no, I'm just going to probably put some on social media and just get back to work. That's just kind of the kid he is. And I think he fit really well at Notre Dame because that's kind of how Chris Tyree is. Chris Tyree is not a real – in your face. Look at me. I'm a star. Chris is just like, okay, when are we getting to work? What time's workouts today? Let me get to work.
Sure.
And I think Dallin and Chris are very similar personalities. Really conscientious, academically oriented, team guys, but also really talented.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that they talked about, Notre Dame sat him down with Tyree and Kyron Williams. And the pitch was like, look, we play together, and the thing is like, because the unique thing about Dallin Hayden's recruitment is Notre Dame signed 2 backs last year. They got another back already in the class right now in Jadarian Price, who's a really good running back. So, hey, do you just need numbers? Like, why are you still recruiting me? And they showed like, look, yes, because you're that good.
Yeah.
Like you fit what we do.
Want to hear that. Things. Yeah. I like how they fit him into the offense because clearly – he wouldn't have brought it up to you if it wasn't important to him. And the fact that he brought it up is like, I'm in a zone scheme now. Mm-hmm. And the fact that they talked about his vision and why that's an important piece and all that, they did their homework. I mean, you can tell they did their homework because that was important to him.
Right. And they really did. Look, I don't know if they're going to get Dallin Hayden. I don't. I still think Ohio State's going to be tough to beat. But I honestly can't say that in the last 3 months if there's anything they could have done differently. They've done a great job with him. And now it's just about, can you close? Can you really separate yourself from Ohio State and say, okay, we've separated ourselves. This is who Ohio State is. This is who we are. Which one does he want?
I tell you what, I sure would love to get a couple W's against Ohio State and Alabama. I mean,
nice.
It's
but
not
that's
a coincidence.
What you got to do to close the gap, right?
No
question. At the end of the day, that's what you got to do.
No question. And the fact that you're bringing up those particular schools, when you're talking about some of these guys, tells you the caliber of these guys, number one, and the fact that Notre Dame's in the running. I mean, you said going in with these 9 guys, Notre Dame's in the top 3 for every single one, which is really important.
Yeah.
And so to go head-to-head with some of those big-time programs and to win some of those battles would just be absolutely huge. So I know that's a little off topic, but
you think about it like so the guys we talked about, Anthony Lucas has a Bama offer, Devin Moore and Benjamin Morrison both have Bama offers, Jake Pope has an Alabama offer, Jake Taylor has an Alabama offer, Dallin Hayden is Ohio State's, I believe, one of their top running back targets.
Yeah.
So absolutely, I think that Notre Dame is competing. I mean, that's why I said these are all gap closers. Every single one of them are gap closers to some degree. And Dallin Hayden has been – look, he's the number one back on my board. He's not the highest ranked back from a national recruiting standpoint. I don't know why. I haven't asked the question why. Don't care why. All I know is what the film tells me.
Sure.
This is a top 100 back. And I think Notre Dame has done a great job convincing him of how he'll fit. The reason it was important, though, to have him talk with Tyree and Kyron together, they said, hey, look, you put in the work, they'll find a way for you to play, is because you got to convince him of that because it's like, look, we've already got Jadarian Price, and they love Jadarian Price.
And they got 2 guys coming in the fall, too. Yeah.
It's kind of saying, hey, look, number one, you're going to have competition wherever you go. Ohio State signed 2 higher-ranked running backs in 2021 than Notre Dame did. Travion Henderson's a 5-star. He was a top 15 player nationally. So he's not worried about competition. It's not about competition. It's about, okay, how do we fit together? How do you plan on using both? Is it like, do I got to come in and say, okay, I got to compete and I got to be number one? And if I'm not number one, I'm not going to play? Or is it if I come in and I'm not number one, I still want to play? And I think that's the really great selling point that Notre Dame did, which is, look, we have used multiple backs together. We'll continue to use multiple backs together. And the fact that we're trying to recruit a 4th back in 2 classes shows you that we value running backs can do a little bit everything.
Yeah.
And that's an important thing.
So you already mentioned Merriweather and Stroud, still waiting on some more information on those guys, but you still feel good about where Notre Dame.
Yeah, I haven't really got enough information to really feel like I can add anything than what we've added before, which is fair. Notre Dame's in a great position with both of them.
Just want to make sure I mentioned both of them, so people didn't think we forgot.
Shrouth is not, from what I was told, Shrouth is not going to be visiting Ohio State. That was the one final visit, so I would expect him to be in decision-making mode pretty soon.
Awesome. And we expect that to go, hopefully, in a good direction.
Unless something went catastrophically wrong.
Yes.
I would expect that to happen, yes.
Okay, fair enough. So last but not least, Jake Taylor. He, I believe, is your number one tackle on the board.
Yes,
you mentioned that earlier.
With all due respect to Zach Rice and Joe Bruner and all these other tackles on the board, Jake Taylor is the best tackle on the board for Notre Dame. I mean, just my evaluation, he's the number one tackle on the board.
And you mentioned at the top of the show that Notre Dame's in a great place with everybody but one guy. Well, we've only not talked about
it's
one.
Not that they're not in a great place. I think Notre Dame did a good job this weekend with Jake Taylor.
Yeah.
But, I'm trying to get a hold of him personally to find out from Jake. We chatted just briefly last night, not about his recruitment, just about setting up an opportunity to talk. He was going to sit down with his family for dinner. So this isn't coming from Jake Taylor. This is coming from other sources.
Yeah.
Things went well this weekend, but they didn't close the gap on Oklahoma. And that was the team to beat. Doesn't sound like there's a lot of confidence they narrowed that gap. And he visits Oklahoma this weekend. And so unless they can somehow close that gap post-visit, which is possible.
Yeah,
right?
Sure.
It sounds like this one is not going to end. This is the one where I don't feel like they really made a move. It went well. There's nothing negative that came out of the visit. They just didn't do anything to separate themselves and close that gap, which it's really puzzling for me. And I don't want to get too much into it because there's going to be 87,000 Homer downvotes of the podcast. But it is concerning to me that tackle has become such a problem at Notre Dame in the last couple of years. I mean, they got Blake Fisher, but Blake Fisher's an in-state kid. Like anyone can get Blake Fisher. He was going to come to Notre Dame unless you screwed it up. But you look at the other tackles in the class with Tosh Baker, right? They're getting some guys, but they struck out on Peter Skoronski, Jimmy Chris, a lot of their top guys. Last year they got Blake Fisher, but they struck out on Nolan Rucci, on Wyatt Milam, on Landon Tangwall, all their other tackles, and they had to go all the way down to Joe Alt and Caleb Johnson. This year they got Ty Chan early, and now they're not. It doesn't look to me like they're in position to land any of the other top tackles in the class. So that is a bit problematic for me.
Yes.
So it just means that, look, you've got two really good young tackles already on the roster in Tosh Baker and Blake Fisher.
So you're good for now.
You've got a really good young upside guy in Joe Alt, right? And Ty Chan. But what made Notre Dame so good for a long time was they were just loading up on those tackles every year. I mean, most of the kids they were recruiting were tackles.
Yes.
What you're seeing now from Notre Dame is they're recruiting a lot more interior players. So let's just say they add Billy Shrouth and Carson Hinsman, which would be a heck of an offensive line class. There's only one of those guys that plays tackle, even for his high school team, much less his college team.
Sure.
And that would be Ty Chan.
Right.
So it is a little bit problematic. This was one I was hoping that, I think this was a visit that had a potential to be a big needle mover for Jake Taylor, and it just didn't happen for whatever reason. It just didn't happen. Now I'm hoping to get more, and if we get more and things like that, we'll follow up in future shows because, as you know, we may talk about tight ends and cornerbacks in future shows, but we'll obviously get to other topics and we can address those things in Q&As. But it sounds like for now, from what I'm hearing so far, this is one that again, not that anything went wrong. It's just they didn't close the gap on Oklahoma.
So to summarize, and you can tell me if I'm out in left field here, Brian, but to summarize, it sounds like everything went really well for Notre Dame this weekend. They just didn't quite close the gap maybe for Jake Taylor. Not that it went poorly, but just didn't quite, erase that gap at all between Oklahoma and Notre Dame. But for everybody else, it sounds like it either is the same for Notre Dame, and then they're in the lead for those guys going out of the weekend like they were going in, or they either closed the gap or they extended it. I mean, it was all good for Notre Dame across the board, other than Jake Taylor.
So like I said, Vince, before this week, I said in I think Thursday's show, and I believe I also said in the mailbag show that I predict that when it's all said and done, and I made very clear, say when it's all said and done, I say at this weekend,
right?
When it's all said and done, I think Notre Dame gets 6 of the 9 that visited this weekend.
That's pretty darn good.
I still predict that. And if I had to bet, I would bet that they get one more as opposed to one less. That's where I am now. Now, again,
7 out of 9.
We'll see how things go when these kids get on other campuses and things like that. But coming out of the visit, out of the Notre Dame visit, that's where I stand. And if I feel like there's a change and kid goes somewhere else and that it doesn't go well, then we'll let you know. But that's how I feel based on what I heard before the visit with where Notre Dame stood, what I heard during the visit with how it was going, and then where things are coming out of the visit. I feel comfortable. Now, again, there's closing that needs to be done. Absolutely. I'm not saying they have 6 silent commitments. They don't have 6 silent commitments coming out of this weekend. I'm not saying that.
Right.
I'm just saying I think Notre Dame has put themselves in a very good position to where they're now the team to beat for a good chunk of these guys. I'm going to be a little bold here. I think they're the team to beat for Tobias Merriweather. I think they're the team to beat for Billy Schrouth. I think they're the team to beat for Anthony Lucas. I think they're the team to beat for Junior Tuihalamaka. I think they're the team to beat for Benjamin Morrison. I think they're the team to beat for Devin Moore. And I think as of right now, I think they're the team to beat for Dallin Hayden. Or not Dallin Hayden, I'm sorry, Jake Pope. Excuse me, Jake Pope, not Dallin Hayden. So that's where now again, team to beat doesn't mean it's a lock.
Doesn't mean winner. That just means you're winning the race.
Now you're the team that everyone's going to negatively recruit against.
You've got the target on your back now.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Not that you didn't before, but now you definitely do. Yeah, right. No question. So, and we also wanted to talk about Jalen Sneed, right?
Yes.
And kind of where things go. He arrives on campus today for his official visit, along with 2 others who are already committed. But he arrives today. So, thoughts on that going in and where things stand with him?
Yeah. So, for the last month, I have felt this one was, and like I wrote it today, this, from everything I had been told for the last month, Jalen Sneed's visit to Notre Dame this week was the final piece to him committing to Notre Dame. I mean, that's what my multiple sources have told me. You can kind of follow the actions of different things, and you could see that this is where it was trending.
Yeah.
The Oregon visit last weekend changed that. And this is now a battle. Notre Dame is now in a battle. Oregon did 2 things really well. And this is why this current Oregon staff's having success. The previous coaches at Oregon did a great job with flash. I mean, and so is this staff. And it's Nike and Phil Knight and the red carpet and awesome facilities and all that. But then once these kids kind of got down to the meat and potatoes, the nuts and bolts, whatever you want to say, whatever idiom you want to use, there wasn't a lot there. What this staff has done with Mario Cristobal, with Tim DeRuyter as the defensive coordinator, is they're able to combine the flash with substance.
Okay. Here's
how you fit. Here's why you would make an impact in this defense and all that kind of stuff.
Sure.
And that had an impact on Jalen. I mean, so it wasn't if it was just flash with no substance, he would have loved the visit and then he'd commit to Notre Dame this month, right? That's how it would have gone. They hit it out of the park. I mean, just hit it out of the park with Oregon.
And that was this past weekend?
That was last weekend.
It was last weekend.
This weekend, he was at a 7-on-7. I think it was the Future 50 thing.
Gotcha.
That's why he didn't visit. It was last weekend.
Gotcha.
And so now it is much more of a close battle between Notre Dame and Oregon.
Well, if there's a close battle, I like having the last visit. Yeah, I was going to say, I like having the last visit.
I think he'll still take at least one more visit. He's talked about going to Tennessee and some other things. I still think that deep down, Jalen Sneed still wants more offers. That's my sneaky bad feeling I've had about him for a little while. But
just to have more offers, or because he's looking for a specific
Alabama
school?
hasn't offered him, Clemson hasn't offered him. He's from South Carolina.
Gotcha.
I just a nervous feeling I have, but that's maybe as much paranoia as it is intel.
Okay,
but so that one, I'm a little bit more nervous for Notre Dame with his recruitment now than I was a week ago,
week and a half ago.
Yeah. So they're going to have to knock it out of the park. Now you've got Tyson Ford on campus. You've got Darren Agu on campus from Georgia. Tyson Ford's from Missouri. I think at least one more commit will probably show up some point in time this week for an unofficial visit. They may bump into each other. But right now, I think this is kind of where You got him on campus the next it's 3 days, right? It's a 48-hour visit, but it kind of starts on Monday. 24 hours later is Tuesday, and then 24 hours later it ends on Wednesday, basically.
Sure.
So they've got, that period of time to say, okay, here's why this is where you need to be. And I think that relationship with Marcus Freeman is a strong one. I think at the end of the day, that's going to ultimately be what wins it for Notre Dame if they're going to win it. Yeah. But they're in a much tighter battle today than they were 10 days ago when it comes to Jalen Sneed.
Well, it's a good thing he's on campus right now because the weather is beautiful, and I'm sure they're going to knock it out of the park with him. So I feel confident there.
Because if they do as well with him as they did with the other defensive recruits this weekend, then yes, right. I
guess part of that is because he's a defensive player that makes me feel very confident. I have a lot of faith in this staff in the defensive side of the ball. Just a ton of faith. If they can get kids on campus, they're going to make an impact. Yeah. So I feel good about it. So ready to jump into some comments and questions here, Brian?
Yeah. I mean, that's, we had so I had a buddy of mine send me Sonny Styles, the 2023 Rover, maybe eventual linebacker, who's the younger brother of Lorenzo Styles and the son of former Ohio State linebacker Lorenzo Styles Sr. was on campus, and he took a picture. And of course, Lorenzo Jr. has this big smile on his face because that's just Lorenzo. Yeah. And Sonny has this really serious look on his face. And a buddy of mine sent me a text, and he was like, yeah, this makes me nervous because he doesn't look happy. And I had to send him a couple pictures. I'm like, that's always how Sonny looks. Like, Sonny is this really, like, I tweeted this. Sonny strikes me as that kind of kid. He's always really serious.
Yeah.
Right. And if you sit down and got to know him, he just strikes me as the kind of kid that would rather talk about world events or politics or culture or, as opposed to like, let's talk football. Like, he's just a real serious minded young kid or young man. And so, and he also he looks like that in every picture. So if you've seen that and you were nervous, like he didn't look happy, Lorenzo looks super happy, he doesn't look happy. It's just how Sonny is. He's a serious kid. I mean, I watched him for several hours at the Ohio State camp, and he just had the same expression on his face every single minute. Yeah. That's not good or bad. It's just him. So don't try to read it. Somebody's, this kid looked happy wearing a uniform. This kid didn't. For all you know, they took 50 pictures of the kid. He was smiling in 47 of them, but the best picture they put out there was the one where he wasn't smiling.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's a photo shoot. You guys got to understand that too.
So I would just encourage people not to get too worked up into facial expressions of recruits during visits. Okay. So
and by the way, and those are longer days too. Like, sometimes those kids get tired.
I was talking to Dallin Hayden last night. And and you talk to other kids after these visits, and it's just they're tired. I was telling somebody yesterday, I said, when we did it, the D3 level events, we didn't do a whole lot of multi-day visits, but there would be times where we'd fly kids up from Florida and they'd be on campus for a few days. And I'm just telling you, like, they're pretty worn out. I mean, when we're driving the van back to the airport after the visits, those kids are all in the back sleeping. I mean, these are long days.
They are.
I mean, you're showing them everything. I mean, they're going to learn. It's like a crash course in your program in 48 hours.
Correct.
And so, these are. And sometimes if this kid took a visit last week and now he's doing another one this week, or some kid was at a camp 2 days before, whatever else.
Sure.
You just let these things play out. Don't get too worked up about that kind of stuff.
It's not all about the body language, right?
Right.
All right. So we're going to jump right in here. Obviously, we've got some comments that I'll just throw up here because some of them are kind of funny. Tony says, Brian, I need to know who's committing. I can't take it. Please tell us. But that was like 2 hours ago. So I think we probably scratched that itch a little bit.
Hope so.
And Notre Dame 2164. Brian, what happened this weekend? What happened?
Now we know.
Yeah. Good stuff. Joe says, I keep telling myself not to check your podcast, go on to Bleacher Reports, but I can't help it. Any good news? I see that we struck out on the grad transfer from Tulsa. Is it a big loss? And before we decided to kind of call an audible and talk straight up the weekend's recruiting, we were going to talk cornerback today.
Which we'll do tomorrow now.
Right. We were going to talk cornerback because of a Caleb Evans and what he decided and things of that nature. So is it a big loss?
Briefly talk about it now and then preview. We'll dive into it more tomorrow.
Correct.
Right, Joe? But here's the deal. Is it a loss from the standpoint of he's a talented player that would have made this roster even better? Yes.
Yeah.
But as I wrote in an article, the minute he went elsewhere, the reality is Notre Dame was recruiting him from a position of strength, meaning there's really 3 reasons to recruit a grad transfer. One is to fill a depth chart hole. Number 2 is because, there's a depth position overall. So like Jack Cohn, there's talent at quarterback, but it's really young. There was sort of lacking a veteran presence. Sure. And so it was, that was a need. Then you're just taking a kid because he's too good not to take. And that was the situation with the Caleb Evans. There's other really supposedly talented or highly ranked kids that are on the transfer market at corner that Notre Dame hasn't talked to or isn't pushing for.
Yeah, they haven't even.
This wasn't necessarily they were going after Caleb Evans because they had a need. They just thought he was really, really good, and he is really, really good.
And you always want to bring in somebody that's going to make you better. I mean,
and because of the inexperience at cornerback, that was the one thing he brought that they just aren't. They don't have. But I can assure you that from talking to sources, the minute they got involved with the Caleb Evans, the first question I asked of my sources when that happened is, are you concerned about your current roster? And it was before I could even finish the question, absolutely not. And I was like, okay, come on, be straight with me, off the record. Absolutely not. Okay. And the reason is it was always about that Caleb is just really good.
Yeah.
But we like our talent. And a lot of people thought he was being recruited to take over for Cam Hart. No, he was being recruited to play the field corner position where Clarence Lewis and Tariq Bracy are at, who the staff has praised and raved about. So it was about this kid's just too good not to recruit. He's too good of a scheme fit not to recruit. So is it a loss from the standpoint of, am I concerned about corner now? No, I'm not. Corner we were talking about, Vince, how we were higher on the cornerback board or on cornerback depth chart coming out of the spring, and how we thought it could eventually become a position of strength.
Yes.
Before we knew that Notre Dame was after Caleb
Evans. In the conversation. That's right.
Right. So is it a loss from the standpoint of you had a chance to get a big time player and he went somewhere else? Yes. Is it a loss because now your cornerback depth chart is concerning? No, there's not. I mean, there's a lot of confidence about the future of the cornerback position at Notre Dame, and that begins in 2021. The other part of this, too, is let's be clear. We said this for 2 weeks. If Notre Dame doesn't get a Caleb Evans, it's not because they did something wrong.
Right.
He went to Missouri, whose position coach is now his position coach at Tulsa. And as a former player and a former coach, I can assure you that when you have that kind of connection with someone, it's hard to beat that.
Right.
No matter how much you sell it. But yes, I know that you got a better team and all this other kind of stuff, but that's my guy. And then we
talked about that. Yeah,
somebody even said on Facebook, well, he's afraid of competition. He's playing in the SEC. I don't care what Missouri's record is. He's facing SEC receivers every week.
Yes.
Caleb is not worried about competition. Simply put, Missouri's closer to home, and Missouri is where the position coach that he knows the best, that he knows has his back, that he knows how to develop him, that he knows his skill set. It was not about playing time. He was going to start at Notre Dame. It just was. And so I don't think Notre Dame did anything wrong. There's nothing I'm going to criticize him for. Nothing. It just, he made a decision that was best for him, and Notre Dame's going to be just fine.
Right. And Notre Dame's okay with it too. Right. Like
they would have wanted him, obviously, but it wasn't like, man, if we don't get him, who are we going to go after next? That's not
exactly. That's what I meant by that.
Yeah.
Connor hitting us with a super chat, so we got to throw it up. Connor, my man, thank you, sir. He says, "What's the craziest story you've heard about unethical tactics during a campus visit? I always imagine Notre Dame's rivals being sleazy." Hilarious.
I mean, for a lack of desire to get demonetized, let's just say the worst stories I've heard in regards to unethical treatment or unethical tactics refers teenage boys and college girls, and just leave it at that.
I agree with that as well. I've heard those stories as well. Okay.
I mean, other than Tennessee handing out bags of a McDonald's bag full of cash.
Oh, get me in line for that.
Every time my wife comes home at McDonald's, I get all excited. Like, ooh, how much money did you? Oh, it's a big. I need to move to Tennessee. Worse.
Joe says, all I read that so-and-so had a great time on their visit to Notre Dame. They all say that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And that's always been the case and always will be the case.
Yep.
You will rarely hear, and that's why we don't write a million stories about that. We're doing this. I give you intel. Like, look, this is what I'm hearing from sources. It's also why most of what I told you today isn't coming from the prospects, because
right.
Those kids they're gonna. And look, I've been doing this a long time, not just doing this, but also when I was a coach, you got to have an idea of when a kid's every kid tells you what he wants to hear until the moment he tells you he's going somewhere else.
Absolutely.
Right. So you learn to look for clues
because they don't want to disappoint you. I mean, they don't want you to,
it's a level of respect. I mean, look, this coach is recruiting me. I like this coach. That's why I get so annoyed when these kids do this thing. And I think they're kind of, I think other people are kind of, but when these kids got their Final Five and they take hats and they throw them on the ground, so I'm like, that's classless. Like, you want to do an announcement, that's cool, but don't do one of those things. So, Joe, that's why we do it a little differently. And that's not a knock on anybody else. Cause I mean, look, it's your job to report the news of what happened. We just try to provide a little different outlook, some more analysis, as opposed to just saying, hey, it went great.
Yeah.
And that's why we do so much sources instead of just talking to these young men. Cause most of these kids are smart, respectful, and they're going to, and they did have a great time. This is the other thing. When a kid picks another school, it doesn't mean he didn't like his second and third options. He liked them a lot too. So like if Jake Taylor picks Oklahoma, doesn't mean that he hated Notre Dame. It means he liked Oklahoma more. Now, are there things that Notre Dame could have done differently and better in his recruitment? Absolutely. And if they don't get him, we'll address those things. But, if Dallin Hayden picks Ohio State, does that mean all the things he said about Notre Dame weren't true? They were true. It's just Ohio State is a better fit, for him, is what he thinks. And if he picks on Notre Dame, does that mean he doesn't love Tony Alford and doesn't respect Ohio State? No, it just means Notre Dame was a better fit. So, yeah, I mean, these kids all say that, but they're not being dishonest. I mean, these visits are going well. It just doesn't always mean that they're going to end with that kid picking that school.
And that's okay. I mean,
otherwise, Alabama would sign 175 kids a year.
Sometimes they do. I mean, anyway. JoJo says, hey, Coach D and Vince, so how do you think we did this weekend with recruits, especially with Taylor, Moore, and Lucas? Sounds like Junior might be coming soon. I don't know if you wanted to recap quick.
I think defensively, I think they crushed it with Moore, with Lucas, with Junior. I think with Jake Taylor, they didn't move the needle. Hey, you got it. You can't pass up my guy Trey and his little comment. That's my dude.
It says, good afternoon from the West Coast, my Waffle House warrior brother.
Well, there's a story behind that. Yes.
Okay.
So Trey and I first met. This was he was in Tennessee at the time. He's now out in the West Coast, but he was coaching high school football at Tennessee at the time. Trey's a former college football player, and I believe he coached in college as well, but then coached high school. Okay. And we met at a Waffle House one night when I was in town for the Music City Bowl in 2014 when Notre Dame played LSU the first time.
I remember, yeah.
And so Trey and I got to talking. So I like to talk, right? I'm going to break some news to people.
No, you don't.
I like to talk, and I like to talk about football. What I didn't know is Trey can match me word for word, and he loves to talk ball too.
Nope, don't believe it.
So I look down at my watch and it's like 3:00 in the morning, and my wife has tried to call me like 10 times. She's panicking. She has no clue what's going on. But no, so Trey, he's been my guy ever since. So and I'm hoping to get him on the show at some point in time this summer, because Trey really knows football and he really knows defensive players. So we're going to try to get him on for a film breakdown one of these days. So yeah, nice. that's what that story means.
I like it. Yeah. KMA Preston sadly didn't get any commits this weekend, but do you think we got at least one commitment? Oh, we will get at least one commitment this week.
I don't know. I mean, I don't. No one that I know of has set a specific commitment date. Would I be shocked if one or two kids made a public commitment this week? No, I'm not predicting it because those kids haven't set dates yet for it. Right. But I think that Notre Dame has put itself in position. As I said, look, you can focus on the timing of it, or you can focus on who are they going to end up with. Sure. And I think they did a really good job with a lot of these kids. And I think that they'll end up with several of these kids in the class.
He also says, did we improve our standing with any 23 commits this past weekend?
I mean, I think they crushed it with Keon Keeley. I mean, he is a rising junior from Florida, from Berkeley Prep in the Tampa area. They've been elite. They've been his supposed leader for a while. I talked to Brian Smith, who, if you guys remember Brian Smith, who's done some work for us, he now runs this UCF, the Central Florida site for SI and Maven. And so, he still talks a lot of these kids. Brian and I talked back when Notre Dame first offered Keon that Notre Dame was just the place I think that was ultimately his best fit. I don't think they did anything this weekend to hurt that at all. I think Notre Dame's going to be tough to beat for Keon Keeley, and he is massive. You don't see a lot of guys looking down at Mike Elston, and Keon Keeley was looking down a little bit at Mike Elston. He is a massive kid. He's very athletic. He is, as I said last week, he is a Mike Elston special in regards to the type of prospect. Long, athletic, great frame that Matt Bayless is just going to love. I think Notre Dame did a great job with him. That's definitely a 2023 kid that I think Notre Dame's done very well with. But with a lot of these 2023 kids, I don't know if Notre Dame's necessarily – it's not necessarily improve your standing, is just solidify yourself in the mix because it's so early for most of these kids. Like, what you don't want to do is, like, improve your standing. It's maybe – but it's more about just when this kid visits, make sure that you stay in the game.
Yeah, especially
and
for
then
the
stay in the game as you get to the fall and you can get these kids on campus. That's going to be the key.
Yep, for sure. Especially now that the fall should look like the falls of the past.
Yes, and there's going to be some fun night games for Notre Dame this year. I mean, you're going to have USC and North Carolina in back-to-back night games this year, and you can expect a lot of these kids from Florida and Georgia are going to be at Sunday night at Tallahassee as well. Good point. You can absolutely believe there's going to be some kids that Notre Dame is recruiting. They're going to be on campus that weekend as well.
And by the way, we had one heck of a staff meeting yesterday, and we got some good stuff coming up for the season. Just want to throw that out there, tease it a little bit. But like game day, it's going to be fun. It's going to be fun. It's too bad it's June 14th because
don't give away too much because we still got some logistics we got to get through.
Just saying, I think it's going to be fantastic. Just throwing it out there.
Yeah.
Joe says at least the recruiting efforts have improved and are making inroads to recruits that they wouldn't have even had a chance with in the past. And I think we talked about that because when we're talking about the other schools that are involved with a lot of these guys, we're hearing a lot of Alabamas and Ohio States and Clemson.
We weren't hearing a lot of that with top players. And that's the byproduct of two things. Number one is being in the playoff 2 of the last 3 years.
For sure.
It's going to be a part of that. Number 2 is they've made some great hires on the secondary. I mean, in the defensive side. I mean, look, as I've said before, I think Clark Lee was a brilliant defensive coordinator. I mean, I have no complaints about the job Clark Lee did as defensive coordinator. Right. I just think Marcus Freeman's a better recruiter.
Sure.
I think Mike Mickens, everybody knows I adore Todd Light as a person, as a former Notre Dame star, as a coach. I think he was a very good coach. He was not a dynamic recruiter.
Sure.
Mike Mickens, I believe, is. So I think there's a lot of reasons for that. And, of course, Mike Elson's always been a good recruiter, but now he's got NFL success that he's been able to sell to kids as well. And he's, kind of quietly emerged as one of the best developers of NFL talent in recent seasons among the defensive line. So it's a great combination. And you have 2 playoff appearances, 2 top 5 finishes in the last 3 years. And, you should be a recruiting machine. Now, hopefully the offensive staff can tap into that as effectively as the defensive staff has done.
Agreed. Let's see here. Justin says, oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to tell you to bring that one up. So,
okay. He says, make me feel better about this weekend, Brian.
I don't know why you shouldn't feel better. I think, look, and maybe I didn't do a good enough job last week. So I'm going to own this one. I'm going to own this one. Because when I talked about like getting 6 kids from this weekend, perhaps I wasn't clear that I didn't expect those 6 kids to commit this weekend.
Right.
I expected some of these kids to still take visits. I wrote in my preview that I expected Benjamin Morrison to take at least one more visit. I believe I wrote in there. Just because kids committed doesn't mean that it didn't go great. No one expected Anthony Lucas to commit this weekend. No one expected Dallin Hayden or Tobias Merriweather to commit this weekend. Nobody expected Devin Moore to necessarily commit this weekend or Jake Pope to commit this weekend. The expectation was, did you put yourself in position where you're going to be very, very difficult to beat? That's the key. And then you close. And as I said, also, I know I said this last week, this is not a staff that is prone to trying to push kids into making on-campus commitments. That's just not been their MO. There was one kid that I thought might do that, and he didn't. So I was a little surprised by that, but I don't have reason why he didn't. But I think he'll maybe make a decision here pretty soon. We'll find out. But I think, look, I was a little surprised when I got a couple phone calls last night, and I talked to a friend of mine late last night, and he was like, yeah, like the message boards, because, we don't have a message board, so it's kind of hard for me to – although hopefully getting some good news on that here very soon. But so I don't get that message board angst. We don't get as much of that anymore.
And that's okay.
But then I call – friends of mine call me and they're like, so it didn't go well this weekend? I'm like, what? Like, I'm in the midst of writing my report that I put out this morning where I'm like, they crushed it with this guy, they crushed it with this guy, they crushed it with this guy.
Right.
And I got friends texting me and calling me and being like, either they're panicking or they're talking about other people panicking.
Right.
So Justin, I hope you feel better about this from what we talked about, but I think Notre Dame did a great job this weekend for the most part. I mean, it wasn't perfect, because, as I said, I don't think that they made up ground with Jake Taylor. So it wasn't a perfect weekend, but I think this was a very successful first weekend, and I still have confidence that they're going to get 6 out of the 9. I think at the end of the day, the 6 out of the 9, I feel good about where Notre Dame stands right now. Now they just got
6 out of 9, possibly 7. That's a really good average when you bring in 9 guys.
Especially when you consider. I mean, look,
who they are.
There's 9 kids they could have brought in that they could have guaranteed they got those 9 kids. But
of course they could have.
Those 9 kids wouldn't have helped you beat Ohio State and Clemson.
Right.
They said Merriweather, number 1 receiver, Tuihalamaka, number 1 Mike linebacker, Shrouth, number 1 guard, Lucas, number 1 defensive lineman, period. Top 2 corners on the board, Morrison and Moore, both on campus. Jake Pope is a safety take, meaning no matter who else is on the board, if he wanted to come, he's a take.
Yep.
Dallin Hayden, my number 1 running back on the board, and then Jake Taylor, my number 1 offensive tackle on the board. So again, we're talking about a very high level of talent, and I'm thinking Notre Dame right now is at the very least, let's just say there's an upset, right? There's an upset that doesn't go in Notre Dame's favor. At least is going to bat over 500 with those kids. Let's say there's an upset, they only get 5 of those kids. If they get less than 5 of those kids, then something went wrong, and it didn't have anything to do with this weekend.
Yeah.
It'd be about them not closing moving forward. But I don't see that.
Love it.
I feel good about where they stand.
Justin should feel good about it too. Dang it.
I genuinely was surprised when people were like hitting me up like, so it doesn't sound like this weekend went well. I mean, like I was mowing the lawn last night, like, and I came back and I had like 10 text messages from people like, like what's going on? Why didn't they get all these commits? And I'm like, I was so thinking they were going to get all these commitments that I didn't take my phone outside when I mowed the lawn. That's how certain I was they were going to get 15 commitments this weekend. So I do apologize, though, that I didn't make it more clear that don't anticipate at 2 p.m. when all these kids are leaving campus that 7 kids are going to
again, Notre Dame does not necessarily want kids to commit while they're on their visit. They want them to go home and think about it.
Unless a kid knew that this was the pick before he came in. Like we've seen that.
It or whatever. Right. But yeah,
I did think that was going to – I will say I did think that was going to happen with one kid, and it didn't happen. I'm a little surprised by that. So I'm still trying to figure out why that didn't happen.
Okay.
We'll see.
But Zachary Lane, we talked about this. We talked about this picture, but he goes, did anybody see the picture of Josh Burnham and JR Jr., Tuihalamaka? See, I got it. With Coach Freeman. Burnham wasn't even supposed to be at Notre Dame this weekend. Apparently, he's the lead recruiter for Junior now, which is awesome. I love the fact that they sat both of those guys down together, and I think that was a really nice strategy.
Yeah, he is an impressive. I want to see if I can pull this picture up. And
I'll pull that up.
I'm gonna put this on the screen. Because this is the picture that he was talking about. Josh Burnham's a big kid, isn't he?
How come those guys never come to the high school I'm coaching? Like, why does that never happen?
Josh Burnham's not that far away, but yeah. So now again, keep in mind, Marcus Freeman played linebacker in the National Football League. Now he's still not as big as a linebacker in the NFL, but he was a 6'1", 6'2" guy.
He still looks like their little uncle or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Those are big kids. Those are big kids. That's a couple impressive looking athletes.
Those aren't defensive tackles. Like those
the thing is, Josh is
dudes.
The thing about Josh is he's so athletic too. That's the thing. That's the really impressive thing. He's such a good athlete. I mean, I've been on that Josh Burnham train for a while, Vince. So,
man, I don't know why.
He's really. I mean, I think he's underrated, and he's like ranked like 100 40th by rivals, and I still think he's underrated. And he's a really talented player.
All righty. Jay says, I hope to hear good news this week with some commitments. Maybe not. KMA Preston, Moore and Morrison been on social media hyping up other prospects in ND gear, making me hopeful about our chances with them as well. Maybe a stretch, but let me dream.
Not a stretch. Not a stretch at all.
Yep. Kenny, been waiting all weekend for today's show.
I was actually thinking about waiting until tomorrow so I could get more intel, because a lot of times a lot of the good intel I'll get is like late Sunday or Monday.
Yeah.
But after I got the texts and calls I got last night, I was like, if I wait till Tuesday, there's going to be some heads exploding.
That's why I got that text from you this morning. It's like audible.
Yeah. Because we sat for lunch and I was like, nah, we'll do some on Tuesday. And because I thought people were like kind of, like I said, I take ownership of that. I didn't do a good enough job of setting the expectations for how quickly some of these things would happen. But that's why I did text you audible. We're going to talk recruiting.
It was great. Well, anyway, I talked about yesterday. Clayton says, I feel like this is either going to be a dose of reality or what I was hoping for.
Well, here's what I'm curious, Clayton. I'd like to know now, after you've listened to the show, what your reaction is. Truly, I would like to kind of know, like, what are you feeling now? Because a lot of these comments were made at like, all these comments you've already put up. We're to 105.
Yeah, right.
We're 3 minutes into the show right now.
Right.
Is where the comments are. So I am curious, kind of, kind of where things stand for that. So yeah, let's keep rolling.
Does Morrison visiting Washington before he decides have cause for concern?
Not for me.
Okay.
Not for me. No.
All right. Yeah, he follows up with got to land Shrouth and hopefully lead from Merriweather coming out of his visit.
Yeah, I believe they do.
Yep.
I believe they led going into the visit, and from everything I've been told, and again, it's not much. That's why we didn't talk a lot about Tobias, because I want to wait till we get more good intel on that one.
Sure.
But I haven't heard the opposite.
Hopefully we'll have an update for tomorrow.
Yeah.
But anyway, Joe says, always great coverage, guys. Thanks for the great coverage. No problemo.
Next couple are about when we were hinting about it, so we can kind of pass those.
Yep, you're right. There we go. Public commitments. Does that mean we have silent ones again?
Well, they haven't, from what I understand, they haven't lost the silent commitments that they have had. So I don't have any new ones to the list, if that's what you're asking.
I hear what you're saying.
Some of the silent commitments have not gone public yet.
Let's see. I'm going to throw this one up there. Mike says, off topic, it would be great to have a show that reviewed the Weiss and Willingham eras from your perspective. I'm a little younger, so I don't fully understand why Notre Dame went off the rails in the 2000s. And look, he's writing it down because I think that would be a fun one to do. That might even be, and welcome, we're pulling back the curtain here, a little production meeting. That might be a fun one to do with one of the roundtables we've been talking about. You know what I mean? So
yeah. So what we're looking to do, since Vince teased it for you, we're looking to have at least once a week to have sort of a roundtable show where it's obviously Vince and I, but we're going to try to have Sean Davis, who was on the show recently, try to be a part of some of those. And we're going to try to find some local media people who are actually willing to come on our channel to engage in those too. And we're going to talk a lot of fun topics, who the best quarterbacks of the BK era, stuff like that. Which we've teased, who's the best team of the Brian Kelly era. But I think those would be good ones too, especially for people that have been on the beat for a while. I think that'd be absolutely.
I think it'd be a lot of fun. Zachary says it's a smart play by Notre Dame not pressing the kids and telling them to go home and make a pro cons list. How do you not pick Notre Dame after making that list?
Agree. I think those kids are going to pick
completely biased, but yes, I don't know how they wouldn't either.
Yeah.
JoJo says, how do we do with Hayden? I saw on social media more hyping.
We've covered that. Yeah.
Yep. I would think Taylor more than Hayden.
That's about the comment about they were trying to figure out who was the guy that Notre Dame didn't do as well.
Yep,
so we can pass through those ones.
Yep, you're right. Ronald says, just wanted to hit the like button before I laid down. Peace, my brothers. You guys look better on a 65-inch TV than you do on a 90. Just saying. Yeah. LOL. Go Irish. I would
Ronald's
imagine that is a fact.
Getting his health back from his chemo. So hope you're enjoying the show, my man. Appreciate the like. Everybody else needs to follow Ronald's kind of his leadership there and hit the like button. before
this on a 90-inch screen. It's probably not a good.
That's why I stay a little further away from the camera. You're like up like this, like
I'm
kissing your microphone.
That's why. Well, that's why I need to invest in not a laptop. But it is what it is. Oh, Zachary says new T-shirt idea. He's like a pterodactyl. Remember you said he had pterodactyl arms?
Yeah. Yeah. Everybody's got these awesome T-shirt ideas.
I know, right?
I love
write them down, man.
it.
That's great.
Yeah.
Tori Phillips. Is that a new name? Is that a new contributor?
No, I think we've seen Tori before.
Yeah, okay. All right. Cool. Well, welcome
back. If not, awesome. Good to see you.
You have better memory than I do on that kind of stuff.
I think I've seen Tori's name before. Yeah.
Okay. He says thoughts on Jake Pope as a player. Sounds like Notre Dame really made a move with him.
I like him. I think he's one of those kids that to me will be an even better college player than he was a high school player. And the reason I say that is Jake's very much a dual threat player in high school. He plays receiver. He's the best receiver for Buford. He plays a lot of safety, kind of moves all over the field for them. I think he's one of those guys when he gets to college and actually focuses in on one position, that his game is going to get a lot better. I think I'm curious how big he actually is because he's listed at like 6'6". It's just hard to tell because he plays against such good competition. He doesn't tower over kids like maybe some other kids do. He plays in a really good area down there. Plays at Buford High School where Darius Walker was from. Omar Hunter, for those that remember, is from there. Very good level of football. He's very athletic. He's got really good short area quickness. I think he's got good open field speed. I mean, you can really see that at receiver. He's a I wouldn't call him skinny because he's a pretty athletic kid, but he's, not big. He's kind of on the thin side. Okay. He's probably like 180, 185, but he will stick. He will come downhill and he will stick. Good change of direction, loose hips, seems to have good instincts from what I can tell on highlights. I haven't seen a ton of game film of him yet, which is why I haven't really done a lot of pushing him as a player because I really want to see some game film to see some of those intangible things you can really only tell by watching a guy play after play after play. But from what I've seen of him so far, I really like him athletically. And I think he's got a lot of potential to be a good safety. I think his thing for me, Vince, is he's more upside right now than he has proven for me. Because I really like the athleticism. I just think, he's one of those guys that playing both ways is, he's sort of not mastered the secondary yet at this point in time. But I really like his upside a lot. His athleticism. Okay. It's certainly going to add athleticism to the back end of the secondary should Notre Dame be able to fend off Ohio State and Alabama the next couple weeks and get him, which, again, it would be – I hope that my comments earlier were understood correctly. I would take Jake Pope in a heartbeat. I think Notre Dame did a great job with Jake Pope. I'm just not as nervous they're going to be able to hold on to that strong feeling with him as I am with some of the other guys. And that wasn't a negative on Jake Pope at all. It just I just think he's more open, I think, still at this point in time.
The Bears man, great name, by the way. Thoughts on Shrouth? A lot of people seem really worried, but I'm still confident.
I'm still confident, too. He was the guy that I thought would commit this weekend. He's the one guy that I thought would go public this weekend, and he hasn't done that yet. So, but as I said earlier, I haven't got a lot of intel on him from this weekend, so I can't really say a lot of that other than I haven't heard anything that makes me think that what I believed coming into the visit isn't still true now.
Fair enough. Ronald checking back in. He said, I've decided to come up your way to bring the rendering. I want to see the campus and get my fall gear. Lunch is on me. Coach is looking at mid-July, Lord willing. For me, I expect a top 5 class. It's ND, baby. No excuses.
Well, Ronald, if you have the strength to make it up here this summer and get on campus, you will certainly have a lunch date with Vince and I. That is
absolutely. Sure. That sounds like a blast, actually. Let's see. Oh, MT41 says, where is Notre Dame with Carnell Tate?
They're trying to get him. They're going to get him back on campus, I believe, sometime next week, maybe later this week. Look, Ohio State's made a hard charge on him, and Notre Dame's now in the fight for their lives with him. And if they don't recover quickly and if they don't get some momentum back, they're going to end up losing him. But there's still a lot of time. I don't believe Cardinal is in decision-making mode as of right now, but this is what we talked about. For Notre Dame to close the gap, eventually they're going to have to start beating Ohio State for some kids. You don't have to beat them for 12 kids a year. You got to beat them for 1 or 2 kids a year.
You got to go head-to-head and beat them.
You have to. You have to be able to beat Alabama for a kid or two. And, at some point in time, you say, well, if you don't have a coach at that position that can beat those teams now, you need to find someone who can.
Yeah, I agree. I completely agree. KMA says, do you think Sonny Styles is the kind of guy who would want to play with his brother, or is he the type that wants to be different and play somewhere else?
I think that's ultimately the decision he's got to make. And I don't think he has one that he definitely wants to do. I think one thing that I have, from what I've learned about the Styles family, the mom and the dad, is they are very much about teaching their boys to be free thinkers and independent thinkers and do what is best for you. Just because Ohio State was best for me as the dad doesn't mean it's best for you. Just because Notre Dame was the best thing for Lorenzo, your older brother, doesn't mean it's the best thing for you. Doesn't mean it's not. And they have really allowed – they did the same thing with Lorenzo. They allowed Lorenzo to say, hey, look, we're going to guide you of the things you need to be thinking about and the things that are important should be important to you. But at the end of the day, it's going to be your decision. And they're going to do the same thing with Sonny. Now, do I think that Sonny that Lorenzo being here is a plus for Notre Dame? Yes. Will it be the determining factor? No. I think if he picks Notre Dame, it's because Notre Dame sold him on what they can do for him. And I think that's something that's very important. I think it's important to him. I think it's important to the family that he be allowed to make his own decision. And I think that is a great way. I mean, not that I'm going to comment on their parenting skills, but from a recruiting standpoint, I think how they've handled those two boys up to this point in time is, been tremendous.
Yeah.
You know, because again, if Sonny picks Notre Dame, he's going to be comfortable with it. Yeah, you remember when Greg Olson committed to Notre Dame because his older brother was at Notre Dame, Christian Olson, and as soon as Christian left, Greg left. Remember that? Because Greg never wanted to be here. He was just here because his brother was here.
Right.
You can't have that. You've got to come because this is what's best for you.
No.
And I think Notre Dame has also done a great job of recruiting Sonny for himself.
Yes, differently. Yeah, right. Sure.
And not, hey, they're not, from what I've been told, it's not a million times of saying, hey, come play with your brother, come play with your brother. It's like, hey, look, here's why we want you. It doesn't have anything to do with Lorenzo. This is why we want you because you're a heck of a player. You're a smart kid. You're the kind of character we want. You're the kind of football player we want. And he is absolutely a gap closer.
Let's see here. Ooh, sorry about that.
Come on, Mike.
Find someone that looks at you the way Brian looks at Xavier Bradshaw's huddle tape. All kidding aside, great show, guys. Exciting times to be.
Now, FYI, my like of Xavier Bradshaw is not based just off huddle film. I've actually seen game film of Xavier Bradshaw, and it's even more impressive than his huddle film.
Yeah, but still.
But no, look, hey, if you can, he's not wrong.
I needed that. Okay. Let's see here. Brent says, thought ND kind of fell out of pole position with Carnell Tate. Unfortunately, I think it was Ohio State that wowed him. You just kind of talked about that. KMA says, Dell Alexander versus Hartline battle for any wide receiver seems like a tough hill.
Obviously, that's Brian Hartline, who is the wide receivers coach at Ohio State, who has done a phenomenal job. Skip the next couple.
Fair enough. Let's see here.
The John Klimek one is a good one. Okay. I got it.
Oh, okay.
I feel that if Notre Dame throws the ball around this year the way some are projecting, then Dell needs to do work. It would be on him to make it happen. Yeah, I think that's going to be a big thing that we're not talking about enough here. Look, I've been critical of Coach Alexander. That's not a surprise. I do think part of it has been the fact that the offense has not been as pass oriented as a lot of top offenses.
Sure.
It just hasn't. I mean, you look at Ohio State, and we've talked about how they spread the ball around. 2 years ago, they had a quarterback that threw 41 touchdown passes, and they've been to the playoff and all that other kind of stuff. So I do think that could help. If Notre Dame throws the ball more effectively this season, which then will lead to them throwing the ball more often, then, I absolutely think that it'll help. Will it all of a sudden mean they're going to get all these kids? No, because there's more to it. But it's sort of a bad combination when you don't have a dynamic recruiter in the position and you don't throw the ball around a whole lot.
Right.
I think that can make it an even tougher sell. So
let's see. KMA says, with a good visit, do you think ND can lock up Sneed very soon?
Not with a good visit. They're going to have a great visit.
Yeah.
And I'm just trying to make sure I'm as specific as possible. A good visit, in my opinion, with what Oregon did last week is not going to get it done. Notre Dame's going to have to knock it out. That doesn't mean they won't get him, but if they just have a good visit, they could still get him, but it's going to take longer. With a great visit, I think they could lock it up. They could lock it up sooner.
Kenny has a response to the Jalen Sneed situation. He says, Oregon has Flash. We have Marcus Freeman.
Very well done.
I will take that, actually. I think that's fantastic. Brent says, Oregon gets all these recruits, can't do anything with them. That conference is horrendous. If I were a recruit, any of those schools would be hard pass for me.
I mean, Oregon did win the Rose Bowl the last full season they played.
It's true.
I mean, look, I get it. Like Oregon, they're kind of coming back from what the previous two head coaches kind of buried the program, especially Willie Taggart. But look, I mean, Mario Cristobal is a good football coach, and he's a very good recruiter. And they would have won. They did win the Pac-12 last year. I mean, again, it was kind of weird, and they didn't play enough games, so I don't put a whole lot into it. But the year before, they won the Rose Bowl. I mean, this isn't – they just put a quarterback and an offensive lineman in the last two drafts in the top 10 of the NFL draft. Let's not act like this is Oregon State, right? I mean, Oregon is a formidable recruiting foe. They have Joe Moorhead as their offensive coordinator. He's done a great job recruiting since he's got there. They hired Tim DeRuyter as their defensive coordinator this offseason. Oregon is a formidable foe. This isn't just about an average program that is all about flash. Yeah, they're about flash.
They are, and they get people in the door.
And that's what worked for Willie Taggart, and that's what worked for I can't remember the coach's name that replaced Chip Kelly. That's what worked before with that guy. But what makes Cristobal different is he understands the difference. Yes, flash is important, and you need to use it. You got these great facilities. You're an idiot if you don't use them.
Absolutely.
But there's more substance being sold at Oregon than there was under previous coaching staffs.
Yep. KMA says, you mentioned ND potentially striking out with their top offensive tackle targets. Who are the backup options, or are there any backup options?
I mean, I think that's partly why they offered Ryan Baer, the kid from Ohio, recently. But I don't think he's a tackle in the next level. At least not for a program that's trying to have a top 5 offensive line and win a national championship. He's an Ohio kid that Ohio State hasn't offered or isn't pushing for. I think that should be it's not an end all be all, but that should be a little bit of a red flag.
Let's see. Searcher Green. I haven't seen Searcher Green in a little while. Welcome back.
He was in the last show. Okay. He threw a couple comments in late. I think maybe after you had to bail.
Okay. I'll never think we are getting a kid from Buford until they are signed. Omar Hunter.
Yeah, I get it. There's been some other kids from Buford that Notre Dame was in decent position with early and ended up losing. So I completely understand that.
Louis, he says, hey, Brian and Vince, first live show today, and I've got a hypothetical for you guys. Would you rather Notre Dame get both Xavier Nwankpa and Jake Taylor, or just Anthony Lucas?
I'd rather take Anthony Lucas. And here's why I say that. Like, look, you're Notre Dame. You should be able to get another Jake Taylor next year, right? It's a lot harder to get Anthony Lucas type of guys.
Yeah, he's more.
And the other thing, too, is the thing that makes Anthony different is Anthony isn't just a great football player. Like, Anthony fits at Notre Dame. This isn't an Aaron Lynch type of situation. And what I thought. I mean, Aaron Lynch was a great player, but Aaron Lynch clearly just didn't fit at Notre Dame.
Sure.
He wanted to come here for one reason only, and it was football. That was it.
Yep, that's not going to work.
Anthony Lucas, if he picks Notre Dame, he's picking Notre Dame for the total package. And he is more of a Jason Adamiola, more of an Isaiah Foskey, more of a Dallin Hayes, more of a Jerry Tillery, meaning he's a kid that, yes, may be a really talented football player, but there's a lot more important factors than just football. And when a kid like that comes along, when you're Notre Dame and he's a 5-star talent, you got to get him.
You can't.
And yes, Xavier Nwankpa was a great player, but here's the deal. If you can't block my 3 technique or 5 technique when I'm in a 3-man front, it doesn't matter who I got at safety. I mean, I'm just saying. But if you have Xavier Nwankpa and you can't get to the quarterback, then you're going to throw on us.
Sure.
I mean, that's really
safety can only be in so many places.
Yeah.
That's why we talked about Kyle Hamilton only being good as the guys around him. Is he going to make plays on his own? Of course. But he needs guys around him as well.
Yeah.
All right. Revolver 6238. Time to offer hero.
Yeah. He is. If you haven't watched this film, check it out. He's a defensive tackle from Hawaii. He's a stud. I have no idea why Notre Dame hasn't offered. I don't know if there's an academic issue. I have no idea, but that kid is an absolute stud. He is a beast.
KMA has a very interesting thought here. He goes, thoughts on the transfer era and all the talk of teams tampering and reaching out to kids already at other schools, trying to convince them to transfer, and how there isn't any rules to stop it. There's rules to stop it, but they go around it.
There's rules that you can't pay players.
Right.
But it hasn't stopped the SEC and other schools from paying players for decades.
And look, it's very easy for me to reach out to my buddy who can reach out to the buddy of somebody else who can reach out to the buddy of somebody else to let them know, hey, if you transfer, we got a soft landing spot for you. You know, that's not difficult to do, especially
and it's not
this
difficult
day and
to
age.
Enforce if the NCAA actually cared.
Well,
this is the thing I've said to you. The NCAA doesn't give a rip about this. They don't give a rip about kids. If they gave a rip about kids, they wouldn't have adopted this policy.
Right.
If they gave a rip about the kids, they wouldn't have said, hey, if you're the fifth, if you're a team that plays in the Pac-12 title or the Big 12 title and you lose that game or you win that game, but you don't get a first round bye, you're going to have to play 17 games as an 18, 19, 20-year-old. You're going to have to play 17 games to win a championship.
Which
if they cared about kids, they wouldn't do that.
The NFL was banging against.
Right. The players didn't want that.
Yeah, right.
The players didn't want that.
Yeah, exactly.
And they had to get money from the NFL to get that, And so if the NCAA cared about players, they do a million things differently.
Sure.
They don't care about this because at the end of the day, it keeps NCAA being talked about all year. It makes it profitable.
Sure.
It's going to make more money.
Sure.
And at the end of the day, it's going to make the big boys better. This is going to create more parity. As I said before, the starting running back at Alabama is not going to leave to go play Kentucky. The kid that breaks out as a freshman at Kentucky will transfer to Alabama or Ohio State or Notre Dame. And this is good for Notre Dame. I mean, this is going to benefit Notre Dame more than it's going to hurt Notre Dame. But I don't care. It's just about what's good or best for the game and what's good or best for young people. And I saw something the other day that in basketball, up to this point in time, only 35% of the kids that are in the transfer portal have found a home. 35%.
Wow. Well, and my biggest fear is that the other 6 conferences are going to be breeding grounds now for the Power 5. It's going to be like the minor leagues. You know what I mean?
Right.
So we could do a whole show on that. No question about it. Notre Dame 2164 says, I don't know if my blood pressure medication is enough to handle following Notre Dame recruiting. Lots of up and downs. Lots of ups and downs. I will say that. Maddie K 55, when schools recruit players, how much does game day environment play into kids committing? Do kids look at Notre Dame and think the game day environment is like a Penn State whiteout? As you know, I'm big on hype.
I mean, I think that's a factor, but I think that's rarely a determining factor.
It's a piece of the puzzle.
Right. I mean, you want to go somewhere that's a great place. I mean, think about what Ryan Harris said. If you didn't listen to the interview, I'm going to pump it again. If you didn't listen to the interview I did with Ryan Harris, do so. Because one thing he talked about was, I asked him, what was it like that first time? Because he was a true freshman starter at left tackle, the last one that they've had back in 2003. What was it like running out of that tunnel for the first time you play a game? And he talked about it. But then the other thing he said was, it never went away. It was that way every single time he ran through the tunnel. And, that's a really cool thing. So I think that game environment matters, but sure. I don't think it's the end all be all. I don't think it's something necessarily, Maddie, that at the end of the day is going to seal the deal. And I think for kids that do buy those kind of things, they're not going to pick Notre Dame anyway, because even though Notre Dame has a great game day environment, there's not a lot of the other flash that a lot of places sell. And look, they're just some kids look for different things, right? I mean, and that's okay. But kids that are doing those kind of things are usually not kids that are going to necessarily care about what makes Notre Dame different. And that's why Notre Dame has such a hard time recruiting big-time basketball players. It's not that there aren't kids that are 5-star players that don't care about academics and those kind of things, but if you're a 5-star basketball player, you're not going to college for 4 years. You're not going to college for 4 years. Right. So what makes Notre Dame different doesn't work for you.
Right.
It's like, hey, look, I love Coach Bray. I love Notre Dame. It's a great school, but I want to be the number 1 overall draft pick in the NBA in a year.
Right. They're not the one. They're not in the one and done business. That's just not who Notre Dame.
Not that Notre Dame wouldn't take some of these guys if they could get them. I mean, they tried to get Thon Maker a couple years ago. They knew he was going to be a one and done. It's just that you're not going to get those guys because what makes you different doesn't stand out to them.
Sure. Let's see. D Rock Irish says, is there a fixed number of guests, including parents, that recruits can take along on their official visits?
I believe it's only 2.
I thought that was the number in my head, but I wasn't 100%.
I believe it's only 2.
Throw it to you.
I could be wrong on that, but I believe it's 2.
That would make a lot of sense. Any chance, any old wide receiver targets from 22 class we kick the tires on? I saw a few TD connections between Angeli and Caden Saunders at the Under Armour 50 this weekend.
Yeah. Caden Saunders isn't coming to Notre Dame. That's kind of been gone for a while. And honestly, Ramon, I mean, I think that's a good question. I think you should always be looking at expanding your board until your board is done.
Yeah, for sure.
I think that's a really good thought process. My only thing is I think the players that are on the board now, they're there to have a great class. You've got Tobias Merriweather, C.J. Williams, Xavier Bradshaw. I think Notre Dame, if they made a hard push, could get at least 2 of those guys, if not all 3, if they do the right things from a recruiting standpoint. They're choosing not to get Xavier Bradshaw.
Sure.
I would rather have Xavier Bradshaw than Caden Saunders. I've said that for a long time. Mm-hmm. That's how good I think Xavier Bradshaw is. The question is will Notre Dame put in the work to get those guys? Look, Tobias Merriweather is the number. There is not a receiver on the board that I think Notre Dame could have a chance with that's out there that's better than Tobias Merriweather. I think Tobias Merriweather, honestly, is one of the 4 or 5 best receivers in the entire country. Forget the board.
Yeah,
I think he's that good. Now, will they get him? We'll find out. But I think they're in a pretty good place.
Yeah.
And there's nothing I've heard that hasn't made me think they're not in a pretty good place. If Xavier Bradshaw, to me, graded out as a top 100 recruit. I mean, all jokes aside, there's a reason that I like Xavier Bradshaw so much. And it's because his film is outstanding. Mm-hmm. He has a skill set that Notre Dame needs. He is a top 100 caliber, top 100 to 150 at the worst tech caliber player, in my view. C.J. Williams is a top 100 to 150 caliber prospect, in my view. You are in great place with all 3 of those guys if you make the right choices. So I think the players are there, Ramon. Now, does that mean that they shouldn't also be looking for more top players that are out there? Sure, because until those kids commit, you really never know where things are going to be.
This is an interesting one because I think there's a misnomer out there, but I'll let you answer it. Percentage of kids Notre Dame can offer that are in the top 100. And he puts 40% question mark.
I mean, Mike Elson said it's 40%. He said it's less than 50%, right? Is what he said?
Yeah, I think that's what he said, yeah.
Mike Elson's always been a pretty straight shooter with me, so I'm going to take his word for that.
Yep.
That means, let's just say it's 40%. That means there's 40 top 100 kids in Notre Dame can land.
That's pretty good.
They only need, 7 or 8 of those to have a top 5 to 7 class.
Right. So that's okay. That's okay.
That's the thing is this whole thing about, they can only offer, okay, if they, so that's 15 more players than they could sign in the class. Right? The problem isn't that there aren't enough top 100 players. The problem is can you land those top 100 players?
Can you go toe-to-toe with those other schools?
Because there's some kids you're not going to offer because they don't fit your system.
Sure.
Right? There's going to be some kids you don't offer because they don't have the academics. There's some kids you offer who don't fit with you personally. There's kids at Alabama won't offer in the top 100. Why? Because they don't fit at Alabama, whether it be schematically or whatever the case may be. So there's plenty of kids on the board for Notre Dame to get. And let's not also forget that some of Notre Dame's best players in the last decade were not top 100 players, but were 5 stars. Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah was not a top 100 player, right? Kyle Hamilton wasn't a top 100 player when they offered him. He was a 3-star when he offered him. There's only one person out there that was ranking him as a 5-star player when Notre Dame offered him. This guy. Tyler Eifert was a 3-star kid. Will Fuller was literally the lowest ranked position player in Notre Dame's class of 2013, according to ESPN. He was pretty good, right?
Still is.
And those guys aren't necessarily anomalies. I mean, Zach Martin wasn't a highly ranked guy. Mike McGlinchey wasn't a top 100 recruit. Ronnie Stanley was not a top 100 recruit. Liam Eichenberg, apparently, we had to beg rivals to put him in the top 200. He turned out to be pretty good, right? Kyron Williams wasn't a top 100 player. The point is finding the right talent, the guys with the ceilings to be elite players. Some of them are going to be top 100 recruits because their talent is more obvious today. Some guys are more down the road with development. And that's why Mike Elko went so hard after Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah. Maybe rivals in 247 didn't think he was a top 100 player. There's a reason I ranked him as a 4-star because I look at it from a coach's lens, not a recruiting analyst who did best at my camp lens.
Right.
Mike Elko wanted Jeremiah Owusu, and so did Clark Lee, wanted him bad because they knew they couldn't get him in Wake Forest. But when they got to Notre Dame, that was one of the first kids they went after. Why? Just because they needed to fill numbers? No, because they saw a kid that you get him in our strength program, whatever it is, you let us coach him up,
Yeah.
This kid's going to be a great player. I can tell you that Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah turning into what he turned into did not surprise Clark Lee and Mike Elko, because they always thought he had great talent. And so that's what I say is find those kids, plus you get yourself 7 or 8 of the top 100, the more ready to play top 100 guys.
You're good.
You're going to have a national championship caliber football team. You just are.
Jacob says, hey, guys, great show. Thank you for the update. Any concerns with Notre Dame offering the Canadian wide receiver? This seems to be a plan B guy that does not move the needle for me.
It doesn't seem like Notre Dame thinks he's a plan B guy. They're pushing to get him on campus now. I have no words.
Joe says, are you going to set up some kind of info canopy when the Irish play at home? It would be a great time to meet your fans.
No, but my dad called this weekend.
Oh.
And he listened to the show where we talked about maybe doing a tailgate and how some people wanted to do a tailgate. So my dad has actually offered to work with some people to try to get a Irish Breakdown tailgate set up. So right now we're looking at doing it for the Purdue game and either the North Carolina USC game. It just depends on which one of those 2 games can I get a ticket for my mom and dad. So, but yeah, so it looks like we're definitely going to try to do something for the Purdue game.
Nice.
Where they're going to set up a tailgate, and obviously Vince, you and I will show up at some point in time, and we'll spend a lot of time that day. I told him I'd be good. We want to do one earlier in the year, so that's what we're going to do Purdue game. But then I also thought it'd be smart to do a night game because then we could spend more time there. So yeah, we will. We're going to set some up, Joe, as we kind of get more details. And I mean, there's so many things that go into this. My dad was like, oh yeah, we'll set it up. Done deal. I was like, no, not really. We got to find parking. We've got to, there's so many things we got to do.
Get a parking pass.
I got to give you my credit cards and go to the, to DC meets and get some, some
got to get an Irish Breakdown tent.
Yeah. There's a lot that goes into it. Vince, you paying for that? Go for it. Get that done.
Right. Hold on.
But I want to do it because, again, that's part of the community, right? And it's not even about us getting to meet you guys, which is fun. I want y'all to meet each other.
Yeah,
I think that's the coolest thing is I literally know people that have been friends for decades that literally met at football games. The fans from across the country that are great friends, been great friends for years because they met at a tailgate at a football game.
Right.
I think that'd be a ton of fun. So we're definitely going to plan some stuff this year. As we get closer to the year, we'll have it. But right now, Purdue and USC or North Carolina. So definitely Purdue and then either USC or North Carolina, depending on when I can get tickets from my parents. Because I want parents to fly in from Virginia, run a tailgate, like go home.
Watch the game on the TV in the back of the tailgate.
I want to be able to watch the game, So, yeah. So that's what we're going to do. And I think it'll be a lot of fun. I think it would be.
I think that would be fun. Let's see. Brent, kind of piggybacking off the conversation we just had, he says, how well would Notre Dame recruit if they could offer all the guys that Bama can, or et cetera, the top programs, if we could offer as many as they could offer?
Okay, listen. Notre Dame not landing top classes has nothing to do with they can't offer enough players.
I agree.
So here's and I'm not, Brent, I am not saying you're doing this at all. I'm not. But I think there's this really dangerous misconception out there, not from you, Brent, but from where this whole thing started, that there's this thing say, well, top players don't want to come to Notre Dame. Why? Well, they don't care about academics. What top players are we talking about? We're not talking about offensive linemen. We're not talking about tight ends, right?
Right.
What top players are we talking about? And where are those players from and what do they look like? And I think there's some biases that we need to kind of set aside that are not accurate, in my opinion. Every time Notre Dame has had a great, and you go back to 2002, what did Notre Dame do after the 2002 season when they won 10 games with Ty Willingham? They signed a class that had Brady Quinn, Mo Stovall, Jeff Samardzija, Victor. You know what I mean? You go back and look at what Charlie Weiss did his first 2 years at Notre Dame and what they did recruiting. Notre Dame went 3-9. Notre Dame went 3-9 and signed a top 5 tech caliber class the next year because of the success they had done in the previous years.
Right.
So, so when I look at it, I just say, look, those are the things that I look at and say, Notre Dame, if they are winning, they can get top players. If Notre Dame has if Notre Dame goes out and hires okay, so here's an example. Last 2 years, Notre Dame has struggled to land top-ranked players on defense at certain positions, right? All of a sudden, Marcus Freeman shows up, and all of a sudden, all these top 100 players are looking at Notre Dame.
Yeah.
Is that a coincidence? I don't think it is. Like Notre Dame struggles to, recruit running backs for 4 years. Didn't struggle to recruit top running backs before Autry Denson got here. Don't seem to be struggling to recruit top running backs now. It's because they had a bad recruiter there, okay? Yeah. The fact of the matter is can Notre Dame offer kids that Alabama can? In some instances, no. But you know what? There were kids that Lou Holtz couldn't offer that Alabama could back in the day. The fact is when you win, you're going to get more kids. When you hire dynamic coaches that can recruit and will grind and have the track records, you're going to get top kids. That's what's keeping Notre Dame from being successful. Line. Yeah. Your head coach, all of a sudden this offseason, is getting more involved in recruiting, and wham, look at all the kids that are showing up on campus.
Amazing.
Not a coincidence, right? Those are the things keeping Notre Dame. If you say it's never going to happen to where they can just get any kid they want, nor should it be that way.
Right.
That's what makes Notre Dame unique. You talk to Ryan Harris and you talk to other Notre Dame players, and I've talked to guys that were part of some of the great Lou Holtz teams. I've talked to guys that won championships at Notre Dame, guys that were on the high draft picks, and they'll tell you that's the stuff that made us different. The fact that we knew we were the only ones going to class.
Yeah. Yep.
That made us tougher because we knew you didn't put in the work we put in to get ready for this game.
Right.
You're not ready for what we're bringing to the table. It has become a crutch over time. And it's an unfair crutch. And it's just simple to say, well, they just can't get these kids. Why? And no one will say the exact reason because everybody, when they start thinking through it, they realize what they're implying. Okay? The fact is if you bring in great coaches, if you win on the field, kids will come, right? It's like that Field of Dreams thing. If you win, they will come, right?
Yeah,
it's true. Look at what they did. I mean, I remember Aaron Lynch was decommitted, right? He was going somewhere else. And then Notre Dame went on that 5-game win streak. And I remember getting a text from someone that knew him that he watched that Notre Dame Miami game and he was like, okay, I'm a little bit more. And that's what kind of got that ball rolling down at the Army All-American game that led to Notre Dame getting down there, seeing him and flipping him. Okay? It wasn't because all of a sudden anything changed. It was, okay, these guys are balling.
Yeah.
These guys got something going on, right? You look at the class Notre Dame put together, the highest ranked class Notre Dame has still signed under Brian Kelly was put together during the 12-0 run in 2012. It's not a coincidence.
Right. They have
Notre Dame's best recruiting class since then was the one they just signed, which they put together during a second playoff run in 3 years.
Right.
Not a coincidence, right? And that's with some position coaches that aren't necessarily dynamic recruiters.
Sure.
Okay? There's plenty of kids out there for Notre Dame to sign top 5 to 7 classes every year. It just is. And every time they've had coaches capable of doing the work to get there, they've been successful. So I've never bought that. I'll never buy that. I think that's a cop-out that people at Notre Dame have ingrained into the psyche of Notre Dame fans. And it started with Bob Davie.
Yeah.
And it went to Ty. And the one coach that's never used that as an excuse is Charlie Weiss.
I was going to say Chuck Weiss, man. Yeah.
And who's the one coach in the last 20 years? Who's the one coach that signed the most 5-star recruits? It's Charlie Weiss.
Yeah.
He got Manti after 3 straight crappy seasons because he never bought that. It was about the work. Yeah. Put in the work.
He did the work on the recruiting trail.
He just wasn't a good coach.
Yeah, right. He wasn't a good head coach.
No,
right?
He wasn't a good coach for college because Charlie was a genius when it comes to scheme.
Sure.
Charlie never, and I don't want to give too much because I think it's a great show idea. Charlie never understood the need to develop players.
Absolutely.
And that's why once the veterans who'd already been coached up were gone, they were never the same team.
Correct.
And if you just look at some of the stupid mistakes that were made in the 2009 season that cost them games, they were always technical mistakes, boneheaded mistakes, like things where it was like, you're clearly not teaching these kids how to play the game every day.
Right.
That was an incredibly talented team.
It's all
that was
scheme.
losing to teams they had no business losing to.
Right.
But when you're all scheme and you're not enough, and let's teach these kids how to line up, because when you're in the NFL, you expect those kids to kind of come to you to know how to line up. And do
if
all
they don't, you
things.
cut them and you bring in somebody else.
Exactly. And in college, it's like these. You're got to assume these kids don't know how to get into a stance, and then you coach them up. And that's the thing that. But Charlie never ever made excuses for why Notre Dame couldn't recruit which is why he went out and every year got big-time recruits to come to Notre Dame.
Yep.
It's not. And every time he's hired a coach, Chip Long did that, right? Tony Alford did a great job recruiting. Harry Heastan got big-time recruits all the time. Marcus Freeman's already doing it, right? Mike Mickens literally signed one of the best corner classes of the Brian Kelly era, beat kids with Clemson offers, Florida offers, Georgia offers, and he never got a chance to have an official visit.
Yeah.
Because he put in the work. It's not that hard. And sorry for the long tangent, but again, Brent, that was not against you.
Yeah, that answers his next question.
I think that I understand where you're coming from. It's just I don't accept that. I think that's just been an excuse that people have used for the last 20 years to explain their failures, and I'm talking about coaches. Yep. And Bob Davie was the biggest excuse maker on the planet when it came to Notre Dame. Ty Willingham did the same thing. Oh, it's not my fault. It's everybody else's fault. The only person that never blamed everybody else for his failures was Charlie Weiss. And he was the best recruiter Notre Dame has had since Lou Holtz left. Still.
Yeah. Yep. I'm with you. I am with you. Okay. D-Rock says, wow, 278 on the live chat at this moment. Hit that like button. And Jacob says the same thing. 49 likes with 286 watching. Come on, guys. Support this in any way you can. Mm-hmm. Thank you, gentlemen. Mm-hmm. Appreciate that very, very much. Chad said,
Chad. Yeah.
Yeah.
Chad's trying to bring calm.
Yeah. Right.
Rightfully so. He's correct.
Still have visits. Yes, that is very correct. And look, if I'm a 17-year-old kid, or if I'm the parent of a 17-year-old kid, and let's say one team is leading for my kid or whatever, and you got 5 official visits to go check out other places, mm-hmm. I'm taking them.
I know parents. I've known of parents, Vince, true story. I've known of parents that wanted their kid to come to Notre Dame.
Yeah.
But they encouraged their kids to take more visits.
Yes.
Because they knew that at the end of the day, he needs to experience this. Number one, because he doesn't get another shot at this.
Exactly.
Right? This is what all the hard work has been about. Yes. But number two, they knew that if he doesn't experience those other things, there's a greater chance he has buyer's remorse down the road.
No doubt.
It's like if you buy a house, if you say, hey, we're going to go house shopping, you go to your first house, we're going to take it. And then you pay for it and you buy it and you sign the contract and then you drive around, you're like, hey, you didn't see that neighborhood.
Yeah.
Oh, right. That house looks good.
Yeah.
Oh man, I really like that one. Right. Like you go through the process and it's no different. This is a huge decision for these kids. And if parents are doing some of the right things, then they're going to encourage their kid to think through it more. Now, that doesn't mean that they won't commit when they come, because some kids have already gone through the process.
Sure.
But it's okay. And again, we have to understand Notre Dame's not pushing. There's schools that try to really pressure these kids into committing on campuses.
Yep.
Notre Dame is not that way.
And I love that.
And they've never been a huge get kids to visit while on campus program. It's happened, but it's never been like their primary thing, which is also why Notre Dame tends to have fewer decommitments than most schools as well.
Sure. Well, and it's just, you never want to, if my kid goes for sports or if my kid goes for academics, we're going to go to multiple schools to check out what else is out there. Just like you said, house hunting, car shopping, all of it. I mean, you're making a big decision. Make sure you see all the options. And I have no problem with that whatsoever. Yeah. So anyway, here we go. Sean says, I know it's starting to change, but can you tell me why we're still competing with Michigan for recruits after the last few years, i.e. Dante Moore?
Still Michigan. I mean, Dante Moore's from Detroit. You know how close Detroit is to Ann Arbor? Here's the great. So, Sean, I'll try to point this. You're a Notre Dame fan, right? You've been a Notre Dame fan all your life. If Notre Dame has 3 down years, do you all of a sudden, I'm going to find a new team to look at? No, it's because the point I'm making is it's ingrained in you as a Notre Dame fan because of your years of growing up liking Notre Dame. There are kids that grew up having a favoritism towards Michigan. It's still the in-state school. They're surrounded by Michigan fans everywhere they turn. There's going to be pressure on there. Plus, it's still Michigan. I mean, we may hate, but look, if we can take our Notre Dame fans hat off, someone take my Notre Dame fan hat off here real quick, okay? And I'm just a guy that's trying to bring you honest analysis of what Notre Dame is about or what recruiting is about. Michigan it's still attractive to a lot of kids.
Absolutely.
Right? It's
a beautiful campus too. I mean,
like an idiot with that hat on backwards.
But there's a lot to sell from Michigan.
The big house, the tradition. I mean, the jump man. I think it's ridiculous that a football program is selling a basketball, but the kids love it, right? Whatever. But it's still Michigan. It's still a program that, number one, 2 years ago beat the ever-living snot out of Notre Dame, okay? Yep. But it's also a program that not that long ago, I'm talking 3, 4, 5 years ago, was a 10-plus win team that, 2018, just 2 seasons before this past year, there were people in November thinking Michigan should be in the college football playoff. So, yeah, they've had some down years, and that's why they're not getting a lot of these kids, but they're still going to be a factor. Just like look, Reggie Bush had Notre Dame in his final group, I believe, right? Because it's Notre Dame. Even when Notre Dame has bad coaches, they would still be finalists for certain kids. It wasn't really until Ty's last year that just no one considered them. That's just because they weren't working. But, they're still going to have kids, plus, especially with in-state kids. I mean, again, that's like a kid. I mean, look, honestly, that's like a kid in Chicago not looking at Notre Dame.
Right.
And actually, it's even closer to Ann Arbor than Chicago is to Notre Dame. So, I mean, if Ohio State has 5 down years in a row, kids in Ohio are still going to go to Ohio State.
Sure.
Just is.
Yep. Yeah. No, I'm with you on that one. Chad Williams wants to know, is Burnham Alex Anzalone 2.0?
Okay, so let's take the injury part of it and the recruiting part of it. I'm assuming Chad means the style of play. I think there's some similarities. Alex Anzalone was a very good athlete. That's why he still got drafted where he got drafted, despite having times an underwhelming career. I think I think Josh is a little bit more athletic than Alex. I think Alex was a little bit more advanced when he stepped onto campus as a freshman than I think Josh will be. Partly because Josh plays different sports year round. Josh is a pretty good basketball player for his high school basketball team. I mean, he's a high school basketball player. He's not going to go to college and play basketball, but like as a high school basketball player, because he's almost 6'4", he's really athletic and he's a skilled basketball player. When he starts focusing on football, he's gonna add 15 pounds easy and all those type of things. So I think from a size standpoint, from an athleticism standpoint, there's a lot of similarities. I think here's the important thing. Alex had trouble staying healthy because he was kind of maxed out. He was not a real loose athlete. He was more of an explosive athlete. I think the reason that I like Josh a little bit more from just a durability standpoint is Josh is more flexible. He's more loose. He's not as tightly wound at muscular wise as Alex was.
Sure.
Which is why I think Alex had some of the problems he had. So, but as far as upside and ranking, there's a lot of similarities. And Alex was committed to Notre Dame at one point in time, I believe, ended up signing with Florida. So that's what I'm talking about.
Let's see here. Brandon feeling really good about this weekend, or after this weekend, could feel better about Taylor and Tuihalamaka, but you never know after visits. Made progress with Hayden. Only downfall is that he's at Ohio State next weekend.
I don't know how you could. I can't possibly feel better about Junior Tuihalamaka at this point in time.
Right.
That's one where I'm going to have to disagree with you on that one, Brandon.
Other than that, I think you hit the nail on the head with everything else. But
you all right there, buddy? Get a little.
Yeah, allergies and fun stuff. Yeah. Old Grim says, I feel pretty good right now.
Okay. Good
job. Let's see. Jonathan says he's feeling better after your update. Surprised Junior didn't commit.
He was never going to commit. I mean, for months we've talked about how, and again, I didn't say this last week because I felt like I'd be trying to give stuff away, but he's always there's always been targeting towards his dad's birthday for the day he might make a decision.
Right.
Dad's birthday's next week.
Right.
Or like within the next week.
Yeah.
It's the 18th or 19th. He was never going to commit publicly during his, and I'm not saying he committed silently. I'm just saying he wasn't going to pop this weekend. He wasn't going to make an announcement this weekend. That was never going to happen. And that's okay. I mean, let these kids announce the way they want to. Like, it doesn't have any reflection on how the weekend went. You know what I mean? The weekend went great. I mean, especially with Junior. I mean, I don't know if it could have. I don't think it could have gone better. Brandon says, I love what Merriweather's dad had to say about Tobias's visit. Feeling really good about him. Seems like a tremendous fit. Yep. Been playing that for a while. Joe says, do you blame Quinn that they didn't blow it out of the water with Taylor? He has not been developing the players that are tasked to him. Is it sending a message about the lack of developing linemen? I think that would be reading a little bit more into it than I think is there. I think that part of it is Jeff Quinn's a really good dude. I just don't think he connects with kids the way that Harry Hiestand did. I think part of it is Jeff Quinn is much more likable than Harry Hiestand. But Harry Hiestand didn't try to be likable. It was, here's what I'm going to do for you. And I have the track record to back it up. So I think that maybe there's a little bit to that, Joe, but I just think he's just not the closer that Harry was. I really think that's what it boils down to. I mean, and Harry showed up at Notre Dame sort of with that ability because of his NFL background. And we'll see.
Yep. I have visions of Coach walking into a Gap store at the mall, and when it's about to close, and ask the employees where the Gap closers are. I'm sorry, that was funny. I had to put that up there. I like how, and by the way, that was Jay Wiki Jr. So I got to give credit where credit's due to those who cannot see.
So real quick, so is this just every time I praise a player, is this what it's going to be? I mean, so I can't think a guy's a really good player. I mean, Come on, guys.
Not allowed.
Let's be grown-ups.
Brandon says, I like how personable the coaching staff is with the players. Relationships are a huge deal for prospects. Thought it was really cool. They all had dinner at BK's house Friday night. All right. Let's see. Zach says, awesome show. Every time I see you, it makes my day. Keep up the great job. Wow. That's high praise. I don't even know if my kids think that. Let's see. Wade says, do you think it's more beneficial to get recruits to commit now or wait until later in the year? Seems like Bama always charges later in the year with the big-time recruits, or does it not matter at all?
Bama does that now because they can.
Yes.
I mean, they can flip anybody they want. They can – I'm not going to go there. There are things Bama can do to flip kids later that Notre Dame's never going to be able to do. I don't care how good Notre Dame is. But at the end of the day, there are kids Bama knows if we want that kid late in the process, we're going to go after. I wish Notre Dame would adopt that to a degree. Like there's some kids that Notre Dame has taken way too early. It's like you don't need to take that kid now. If that kid commits somewhere else, you can flip them down the road.
Right.
Or there's 20 kids just like them in the country.
Right.
I think it just depends on the kid, Wade. I think it's a very good question. I think ideally in a perfect world, if I could have my class over before the season starts or at least 75% over before the season starts, but I can also make sure that I have the kind of talent impact that we need, I'd rather do that because then you can kind of focus on your season, number one. Yep. Number two, it allows you to get an early start on 2023 or the next class. And then number three, you have a bigger pool of players that can then help you recruit the last group that you want. And sometimes that's going to be your difference makers. So I would prefer it, as long as you're not reaching for kids just to fill slots, which sometimes Notre Dame has done, if we're going to be honest, as long as you're getting the kind of players you want, then I have no problem with filling up sooner. I just think sometimes you can get in trouble if you're just taking too many guys early. This would hurt Texas. Texas started this whole thing with Mac Brown. They were the ones that started kind of getting their classes filled up super early. And the problem is they were getting a lot of kids that are here's the problem. They're getting a lot of kids that were kind of ready-made.
Yeah.
I don't know if Notre Dame would have taken junior Jeremiah Wusu-Koramoah this early in his recruitment. It wasn't until his senior year that he really blew up. I think you always need to have room for those kind of kids. That's why you don't want to fill up too much this early, especially with the kids that are higher ranked, because some of those kids tend to be a little closer to their ceilings in some instances.
Sure.
So you got to be careful, in my opinion.
Let's see here. Allison says, haven't heard much, if anything, about Andre Green Jr. on 247. It says he has a Notre Dame visit planned for October.
I think, Allison, we talked about him a little bit a couple months ago, but right now, I mean, he has a visit scheduled, but he's a long shot at this point in time. He's one of those kids that if Notre Dame's in his top 5 to 8, they're in the bottom of that 5 to 8. I think he's a heck of a player. I just don't think right now Notre Dame's a major player for him.
Brandon says with players like Moss, Sneed, Lucas, etc., it's going to mainly come down to whether they want flash or they want a future.
I mean, I don't think that's fair. I see. My problem with that kind of comment is you're assuming that a kid can only get a good education at Notre Dame, and if he doesn't pick Notre Dame, he doesn't care about academics. I mean, there's all types of things that go into it. Maybe this school's a better scheme fit for me. I want to major in one particular thing, and this school offers that great major, so it's best of both worlds. It's closer to home. I mean, there's an easier path to playing time there. I mean, it's okay to just because you want to go to a place that they don't have 4 guys that are just as good as you on the depth chart doesn't mean you're afraid of competition. There's also common sense involved. If I'm a quarterback and I'm the year after Trevor Lawrence, I'm not afraid of competition. I just know that I'm not going to play over that guy.
Yeah, right.
Right. And I want to go somewhere and play a pretty good program where I can play. If Anthony Lucas picks another school because he believes that school has the total package is better than Notre Dame's, it's not because of flash. It's, I get where you're coming from, and with maybe with one of those kids that could be true, but I think it's fair to just kind of throw them all into. If Cyrus Moss doesn't pick Notre Dame, it's not because he cares about flash. It's just he thinks another place is a better fit. From everything I know about Cyrus Moss and his family, he's not making a decision for flash, and that doesn't mean he won't pick Oregon. I mean, do you know who the number 1 projected defensive end commit in the 2022 draft is supposed to be and where he plays? It's Kayvon Thibodeau at Oregon. So they're about to produce, a first-round draft pick at defensive end. Notre Dame hasn't produced a first-round draft pick at defensive end since what? 1997? Right? So, I mean, there's other reasons why a kid might go to Oregon than just flash. Sure. And especially now that Mario Cristobal's there, because he has done a really good job of he's a really good football coach. I mean, we just have to come to grips with that. He's a good football coach. He's not just selling flash. He's a better coach than Willie Taggart. And I cannot remember the guy that was there before that replaced Chip Kelly. I cannot believe I can't remember his name. It's really
you're going to look it up.
I am going to look it up.
Mess with you.
Yes. I feel like it's like Mark something. And I cannot believe I cannot remember. Mark Helfrich. Okay, there it is. Like I can picture his face. He does TV now, but I just could not remember his name. He was not a very good coach. He just kind of rode Chip Kelly's coattails.
Oh, absolutely. Because wasn't he a coordinator for Chip Kelly when he left?
He was. Yeah, that's like being. Yeah, he was this coordinator.
Well, you know what I mean.
But that's Chip Kelly wasn't calling plays.
Right. Exactly. That's why he got the job.
Yeah, exactly.
Matt D says Anthony Lucas comes from an awesome family, is an awesome kid. He's a great fit, and from all accounts, had a great time. Fingers crossed.
Yep.
I've seen articles that Jalen Sneed being a 3-team race. Do you guys believe that to be true? Sorry, late to the show.
No, I think it's a 2-team race. I think it's Oregon and Notre Dame right now.
Liam Gaming, Bruner from Wisconsin. Can he play tackle as well?
I mean, he may have to if they get him, but he's not a real top level athlete. To me, he's more Tommy Kramer. Like he would be at tackle what Tommy Kramer was at tackle. A guy that you're like, yeah, okay, he did a decent job, but he needs to play guard. That's how I see it.
3 new crystal balls from Merriweather to Notre Dame.
So basically what everyone is doing is they're finally coming around to what we've been saying for weeks, that Notre Dame is in a great place with Tobias Merriweather.
Right. JT Brogdon says, can we chat about the Styles brothers for a minute or 5?
Go for it, buddy.
Done. We kind of did that already. Yeah. Chad Williams says Sam Young was a true frosh who started at G.
I think he meant Sam Young started at right tackle.
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
Ryan Harris was a left tackle. They have not had a left tackle, true freshman left tackle. And I said that in the interview with him. They have not had a freshman left tackle because they've had 2 right tackle freshmen that I can think of start, because Robert Hainsey started as a freshman.
Right.
In 2017, Sam Young started as a freshman, but they were right tackles.
KMA says, would landing the guys you think Notre Dame will land be enough for a top 5 recruiting class rankings-wise?
Close. Yeah, I mean, it just depends on which – they're not going to get all the guys.
How you fill it out.
Yeah. I think if they can close at a pretty high level, they don't have to – look, here's the deal. They don't have to bat 1,000 to have a top 5 class. But when it comes to Lucas, Tuihalamaka, Moore, Morrison, Nwankpa, Taylor, Hayden – Tobias Merriweather, CJ Williams. I mean, these are just highly ranked guys. I mean, obviously, I love Xavier Bradshaw as a player, but he's not going to move the needle from a ranking standpoint. When you look at those guys, Cyrus Moss, I think I said Luke, you've got to bat over 500 against those guys to finish in the top 5. Because, again, the way that the recruiting rankings are tabulated. It's a points system.
Yep.
Certain guys are, but do they need to bat 600-700 to get a genuine top 5 class? No. And
right.
I think I've expressed what the difference is.
Yeah. Notre Dame 2164 says if we land Sneed and Tuihalamaka with Burnham, where would you rank that linebacker class?
Do not forget about Nolan Ziegler.
Yeah,
Nolan Ziegler is a ball player.
Yeah, and he's already in the class, right? So
yeah, if they get Sneed and Tuihalamaka to go with Burnham and Ziegler, I would say this is it'd be either this or the 2018 class would be the best. And that was with Jack Lamb, Shane Simon, Bo Bauer, and Ovia Gofu. I'd have to really think. And part of it is we need to see these guys develop as seniors. Just based off junior film, it's a debate between those two classes.
Okay.
So I have to think that unless all these guys regress as seniors, they're going to overcome that class. But to me, I'm back and forth on which one it is. And, I thought Shane Simon was a top 100 guy. I thought Jack Lamb was a top 100 guy. I thought Bo Bauer was a top 200 guy.
Yeah. If
they get those 3 guys, I think those 3 that he mentioned are top 100 guys. And I think Nolan Ziegler has as much upside as anybody in the 2018 class. I mean, it'd be a special class, but again, they got to develop. We got to see what they're going to do as seniors. Because I say that they're all better than where Jack Lamb was as a junior, because Jack was like 190 pounds as a junior.
Right.
Jack really took off as a senior because he added some weight and even though he had an injury, he really, really broke out as a senior.
AJ said, I understand it's harder for Bray to recruit big-time players at Notre Dame. However, I still think he could recruit better, and I will not forgive him for botching Jaden Ivey's
Agree. What I'm referring to, all that Vince and I are referring to here, AJ, is we're just talking about like the elite top 10, 5-star, the one and done types.
Yes.
There's definitely room for them to recruit better. No question about it.
The fact that he didn't go more than a mile away from campus to recruit his entire class this year, I think
don't get Vince started on that.
Incredibly lazy.
I like those 2 guys better than Vince does, but yes. But there's been too many mistakes on the recruiting trail.
And I will also say the Jaden Ivey recruitment, he was never coming to Notre Dame.
Yeah.
Based on things that I've heard in the background from a couple of my sources, there was no chance he was ever coming to Notre Dame. And that is a deep-seated situation.
Yeah, and we're not going to get into that, but yes, that's why.
I mean,
they need to continue to have the classes where they're getting the Zach Augustes, they're getting the Jeremy Grants, the Pat Connaughtons.
Yes.
They're not getting enough classes like
those
that.
Those guys are needle movers.
Right, exactly.
Exactly.
They don't have to be like Michigan can go out and recruit 5-star players. We've seen that, right? Notre Dame's never going to do that because Michigan is selling a basketball history tradition.
Sure.
That Notre Dame's just not going to be able. Those kids don't know who Kelly Tribuca is, or David Rivers, or LaFonso Ellis, even much less going back to who was the Tribuca, Bill Lambert, those teams back then. Those kids don't know about that. They don't know who Bill Walton is, so you're not going to be able to sell them on how big the upset went over UCLA. I mean, UCLA used to be really good, really. That's what we're talking about, AJ. So we agree that Notre Dame's basketball program needs to do a better job recruiting than what they've had in recent years. No question about it.
No question.
What we're referring to strictly is those elite top of the draft,
just usually not a
one
fit.
And done type of play.
Yeah.
It's not that they're not a fit. It's just what makes Notre Dame different and unique doesn't work in that recruitment.
I agree.
That's what I'm saying.
I agree, but
I wish the NCAA would change things. However, this is what I think the NCAA could do to help a place like Notre Dame and help these kids. Is one of the stupid aspects of amateurism that I have always believed in is this notion that you can't have degrees designed for players, right? And to me, if you're looking to encourage engineers to come to your school, you design a program that allows them to become successful engineers. You're going to make millions of dollars, tens or if not hundreds of millions of dollars off your athletes. Why can't you have degrees that are geared towards helping them? For example, why not have like a sort of a track for athletes that in certain sports, like basketball, other sports where kids can leave after a year or two, to say, listen, we're going to kind of go in reverse order. So we're going to allow you to have sort of an athlete's track to where we're going to give you classes on, business ethics,
personal
economics, personal finance, things like that are going to help you to be more successful. Why can't the University of Kentucky have classes where these are things that are going to help? And you don't think they'd want to go to those classes? Right. Hey, we're going to teach you about business ethics. We're going to teach you about, things that could maybe help them make sure that they hire a better agent. You know what I mean? Or that they don't have people, how to handle your money. I mean, again, you don't have a class on how to handle your money, but there are economics and business ethics classes and communication classes and all types of things like that could genuinely help these kids be successful in a year. If that were happening, Notre Dame would have something to sell. Listen, yeah, you're only going to be here for a year, but we're going to make sure that 75% of your classes are going to be in the Mendoza School of Business, which, by the way, is the #1 business school in the country. Yes. Right? That's where Notre Dame could have a selling point, but they're handicapped by the NCAA because the NCAA has this ridiculously stupid notion of amateurism. And again, I'm a proponent of the broad picture of amateurism. It's just some of the ways in which the NCAA has defined amateurism are stupid. And yet they won't go hammer North Carolina, who literally had fake classes.
Right.
But Notre Dame can't create classes that, like, some football players are going to not want to take a track like that. They want to major in something different.
And that's one of the reasons they come to Notre Dame.
Right. But if you wanted to, let's say, hey, I want to go to Notre Dame, I want to be a football, I want to be an agent, I want to, whatever the case may be, that there's not something specifically for someone who has an interest in sports the way that there are for other tracks. And that's the thing that there are things you can do if you want to be a sports agent. There are things you can do, but like for a basketball player, you wouldn't be able to do that because you're only there for a year. And that's where I think they need to change some things. Okay, let's roll through, Vince, because we're getting kind of deep. So let's get to some more questions.
Yeah, let's see here.
I see everyone talking about the crystal balls for Tobias Merriweather.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't really comment on what 247 people are predicting. All I'm going to say to you is I think we've been pretty clear for the last couple of weeks that Notre Dame is in a pretty good place with Tobias Merriweather. The question was, as we've said all along, was could they convince him to make the decision this summer? That's still the question. It was never about is Notre Dame as leader. It was if it prolongs into the season, then other schools can then get involved.
Right.
But we've said for a while that Notre Dame is in a great place here, so we shouldn't be too concerned about those.
Maddie, real quick, I have been known to hit the person next to me, and I apologize to all of those people that have, and I have been conditioned. I have been in the press box since 2004. I don't cheer at any games anymore. Like, I'm sitting at my kids' games, and I just sit there in the stands. Like, I am conditioned to just not be noisy anymore, and it's kind of pathetic, to be honest with you. That's why I always volunteer to do, keep the book and do other things, because I also can't sit with parents because they annoy me too much.
Yes, if you want to cheer a little extra loud for us,
yes, please do, because we're not allowed, and it's really no fun either. A lot of things about recruiting at Alabama.
It's not about people being bad people. It's just about we have a scheme and you don't fit our scheme. We're looking for a physical type and you don't fit our physical type. It's it's a little different deal.
KMA is interested about the average age that our audience is. Do we have any kind of stat about?
I don't know. I haven't looked at it.
Do.
I don't know if they have that. I've never really thought to look at that. So I'm actually looking it up now to see if we actually. I know there's things we can look at, like men versus women breakdown, and I want some more ladies in the audience. Yeah, so if you look at the analytics.
Okay.
So I want more ladies on the show, and it's very heavily male. It actually does look like we do have some criteria for there. Yeah.
Oh, look at that. Okay.
Yeah. Interesting. Very interesting.
Are you going to share with us, or?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
The country with the third most audience is the Philippines.
Oh, all right.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Isn't that interesting? Yeah.
That is very interesting, actually.
Yeah.
Justin says, I highly doubt that any other Irish analyst could sit live for 2-ish hours per day and stay interesting. I appreciate it. Sometimes I question us as well when it comes to that. That's a long
people
time.
Stay, so we appreciate it.
Absolutely. Brandon says, if ND settles for Anderson and Ayo Minor, instead of maybe waiting it out for Merriweather Williams and or Bradshaw, then I just give up. I would certainly feel that the hard work at other positions was for nothing. I get that.
Say it's a little bit of a harsher reaction than I would have, but yeah, I would have a similar reaction.
Christopher, did you evaluate Matt James? If so, what were your impressions of him as a player? That's
Matt James was part of Brian Kelly's first recruiting class. He was from Cincinnati St. Xavier. He was the one who passed away when he fell off. I think he fell off a balcony on spring break.
Okay.
Very, very, very tragic situation.
I do remember that. Yes.
I thought he was a good player. I mean, I thought he was a I thought he was a good. I mean, big. He's a big kid, big, strong, decent athlete for his size too. He'd have been a very good player at Notre Dame. I think he would have been a right tackle. I think by 2012, I think him and Zach Martin would have been the starting tackles. I think he'd have been a right tackle. I think Zach Martin would have been a left tackle. I think it'd been a good combination. It was very sad, tragic situation.
That
I
was tragic.
I liked Matt James a lot coming out of high school.
I remember that story now. Wow.
Yeah.
Matt says the 22 class has a real chance of being Kelly's best class if they land several of the kids from this past weekend.
Yeah, 100%.
Yep,
100%.
And that's why this weekend was so.
And that's why I wrote of all the weekends, this was the most important for Notre Dame. Can you bring up that next one? Because
I wasn't sure. Okay,
yeah, that's not entirely true. So there's a reason. Go ahead, Vince.
I was going to say there's a reason why Urban didn't come to Notre Dame. The admissions would not allow him 4 to 5 quote unquote borderline students every year. He chose Florida.
Well, they allowed Charlie Weiss to have kids like that. I mean, there were kids that Charlie could get into school that couldn't get into other places, or that couldn't normally get into Notre Dame.
Right.
There are kids that Brian Kelly can get into school if he so chooses that are not your typical. So that's not necessarily. I mean. That may be what Urban told people, and maybe he wanted to get 4 or 5 more. But at the end of the day, there was a lot of reasons Urban didn't come to Notre Dame, and they're understandable ones. Notre Dame was, at the time, was not – this is pre-Jack Swarbrick. I will say this. If Jack Swarbrick would have come to Notre Dame 6 years before he did, Urban Meyer would have been the head coach of Notre Dame. Because Jack Swarbrick was committed to doing what was necessary to build the program up the right way. And we've seen that his entire tenure as the head coach, as the athletic director of Notre Dame.
Yeah, I agree.
With the facilities upgrades, the stadium, the
and
turf.
Not just for football either. I mean, it's been a consistent construction zone around the athletics
football's
area.
Been first.
Of
football
course.
was first.
Well, they're first in line.
That was it. Notre Dame was not committed to success when Urban Meyer was leaving Utah. And it wasn't just the borderline. I mean, there's some truth to what Chad's saying, but that wasn't necessarily it. That's right there what Matt is saying. It was, and it's not just about facilities. It's about, are you going to do what you need to do to commit to Notre Dame winning?
Right.
And he knew that it was going to take longer to be successful than it was at Florida. But Florida was flat out committed to winning.
Yep.
Notre Dame was not.
Well, and they were more ready-made to win. I mean,
I don't think that would have mattered. I truly believe this. From everything I know about Urban Meyer, look, I spent time around him and his staff when he was at Bowling Green. I know people that know him. If he wanted to be at Notre Dame, but not just because.
Yeah.
And that's the thing is like, yeah, I want to go there, but they're not serious about winning. And name a head coach that didn't succeed at Notre Dame and went somewhere else. It's a career killer if you don't succeed.
It is.
It just is. And the fact is Notre Dame was not committed to success. They were not committed to winning when Urban was trying to become the head coach there. And, that what Chad said was a small part of it. It was a much bigger issue. And he knew it. And he saw it. You got to remember, he saw it firsthand when he was an assistant here and what they put Lou Holtz through when he was kind of coming down. So Jack Swarbrick is the exact opposite. Jack Swarbrick is committed to winning the right way. And that's why we've seen the hundreds of, I mean, I'd be curious what the total number of, I bet you it's creeping up on $1 billion as what Notre Dame has spent. Because it was almost $500,000 just for the stadium upgrades alone, right?
Yeah. Yep. The Crossroads project.
Yeah. And then you look at what they're doing for the basketball program, the indoor football facility. Like you said, there's upcoming renovations coming to the Goog. I mean, it's been amazing what they've done just from – and we're not talking about the other buildings they're building on campus.
Oh, my gosh.
The athletic.
There's no longer any parking lots on campus because they put buildings on all of them.
Yeah.
I mean, if anybody hasn't been to campus recently, I mean, the huge parking lot that used to be right across the street, which the street doesn't even exist anymore, but right across the street from the library, the quote unquote library lot, that doesn't exist anymore because there's buildings all around it, you know? Right. It's just they've made it a pedestrian campus, which is great, but yeah, it's been a constant construction zone.
Which honestly, I mean, if it's better for students, I don't care if it means we have to walk a little far.
Absolutely,
that should be their number one priority.
And look, Notre Dame's campus is not huge. I mean, you talk about
there's
like
not
a
a ton of extra
room
room for them to
exactly.
It's the biggest open spaces are parking lots.
Right, exactly.
We should get a parking garage soon.
Joe says, whatever happened to the kid from Germany? I haven't heard much about him making any moves to get some PT. Alexander Ernstberger.
Aaron, yeah, he's a freshman. I mean, he was a true freshman this year. He actually got a sack, right, against South Florida. He was going to need time, Joe. We're not going to necessarily be curious about how he's developing until we get to next spring, in my opinion.
All right, let's see here. Tom says, I've never checked Brian's and others' Twitter as much as I did Sunday afternoon and evening, waiting to see if there was any breaking news. That's great.
Sorry that you were left hanging all day.
John says maybe Kelly should hire Weiss to be the recruiting coordinator.
Well played, John.
Sorry, that made me cough and cough up a lung. Brent says, you guys are amazing, by the way. Really appreciate you all addressing questions. Appreciate the insight.
A couple here from Chad. Chad says Driscoll is absolutely correct. I always like it when people say that. But what he's referring to is as far as Charlie Weiss wanting NFL-ready players. Player progression was not his forte, and he's absolutely right on that. Let's see, where are we at, Vince?
We're at 254. You just pulled that one up.
Okay. You're going to probably have to leave here soon, aren't you?
Yes, I'm literally going to get kicked out of this building. So I am going to have to go. But good stuff, as always. Tomorrow we've got a position breakdown. But, of course, we will answer all of your questions afterward as well. So I will see everybody tomorrow. And I'm sure Brian will have no problem picking up the rest of these. So, Brian, I will talk to you later, sir.
Sounds good. See you, Vince. All right, let's get through these, rack through these. This is Brandon referring to Junior Tuihalamaka. Just the Texas visit kind of scares me. Think he'll come back down to earth and pick Notre Dame. Look, I said last week, and I say now, Texas did a great job on him, but Notre Dame has never not been his leader. I'm not concerned about that. I'm feeling about as good as that one as I've seen with any. Let's see here. Trying to get through some of these Bama conversations. Really good discussion here. Let's see here. More about the crystal balls. Tom Burke says, sorry, I was late. You mentioned it wasn't a great weekend. I never said that, Tom. I think you misunderstood. I wrote an article today on the front page of Notre Dame at Irish Breakdown where I literally say Notre Dame wraps up great recruiting weekend. So it was a great weekend. I absolutely think it was a very good weekend. KMA Preston says, with guys like Colville and Wesolak leaning Clemson, does Clemson just value them more than Notre Dame, or is there other reasons any backed off these prospects? No. Well, with Colville, there's a little bit more to it than just them liking other players. I think that was more of a fit thing. With DJ Wesolak, they like DJ. It's just they like Darren Agu and Aiden Gabera better. I mean, they literally, if Notre Dame thought DJ Wesolak was a better player than Darren Agu or Aiden Gabera, he'd be in the class right now. They were his leader. He was set to pick them. It's just they like the other kids better, and he waited a little bit too long and allowed them to kind of discover Darren Agu. But that's what I think it was about. So those are two a little bit different situations. All right. Here we go. Jeff Fluke, bigger man crush, Lucas or Bradshaw? I'm really getting tired of these man crush things. Honestly, I think they're just different players. I think that Lucas to me has the higher. I mean, he's to me a legit 5-star caliber player. So I think as far as the kind of impact player he could be, Lucas would be it. And the thing is, I love Xavier Bradshaw, but the number one receiver on the board is Tobias Merriweather. Xavier's number 2. That's why I want both of them. But Tobias is the number one receiver on the board. Joe says, from many of my messages, you can probably decipher that I am from the West Coast and in the backyard of USC. Do you ever travel out here? You should. Many Notre Dame fans out here. Yeah, I've been out there several times. I covered the USC. I covered the Stanford game in 11 and 15 and 17 and 19. No, I didn't go to the game in 19. And then I've been to USC. I was at USC in 2014 and 2016 and 2018. So I've been out there lots of times. I don't think I'm going to go out there this year for a host of reasons, but yeah, I enjoyed out there. My wife is actually grew up in San Diego, so when we try to make it back to California from time to time to see family and friends. So certainly there. Tim Sully, great show today, guys. Go Irish. Thanks for that, buddy. AJ said, I know this is a football-driven show, but I appreciate you guys reading my question and talking Notre Dame basketball as well. I mean, look, we cover Notre Dame. The reason we talk more football is because that's what people want to talk about. You know, but we both follow the basketball team, both like the basketball team. When we had Sean Davis on a while ago, we talked a little bit about the basketball team as well. Now, what I don't have is we don't follow it on the day-to-day basis because I just don't have enough manpower to follow it, like who the top recruits are and things like that. So I don't have people talking about their age because we were talking about what age people were. Tavis is 27. Preston is 20. Hey, by the way, Preston, I saw one of your gun videos recently. It was pretty good. So we'll have to chat about that one of those days. Dustin is 32. Chad is 43. It's a good age, Chad. I like it. It's a very good age. Brent is 35. Ryan Haley's 29. And Tom mentioned some other big-time basketball players. Orlando Woolridge, Tracy Jackson. But again, modern day basketball players, I mean, kids that don't know who those guys are. I remember Orlando Woolridge. I remember him talking about Larry Bird in a video that I watched at ESPN one time. But yeah, a lot of these kids don't know that. Ryan Haley, why do guys who do you guys compare Anthony Lucas to past Notre Dame D-line stars? I think he's a different body type. He's kind of a hybrid of Jason Ademiyola and Stephon Tuitt, in my opinion. He's a bigger and longer than Jason is, so he's got a bigger body than Jason does, but not quite as big as Stephon. I think he brings, Stephon was sort of a defense at that age was sort of a defensive end that could play three technique. I think Jason is a three technique that could play defensive end. I think Anthony's sort of in the middle of those two guys is how I kind of compare them. And from an upside standpoint, honestly, he's as good as any defensive lineman they've signed. I think the only other guy, if they get him, that was not a Freudian slip. I'm just saying, looking ahead, if they were to get him, I think the only defensive lineman to me that I would say maybe would rank higher. And again, this is based on that guy's senior year. As juniors, he'd be the best defensive lineman they would land as a junior since I've been following Notre Dame. Stephon Tuitt would be the next closest. But then if you project what he became as a senior, I loved Aaron Lynch as a junior. Aaron Lynch was an unblockable monster as a senior. I think Aaron Lynch would be the only player that I would say could maybe be better than he was coming out of high school. He's in my opinion, he's that good. His ceiling is at least that good. And I think, like, I don't hand out a lot of 5 stars for juniors. I just don't. And so I kind of have nitpicked his game a little bit to drop him to like a 4.5 star, which is a top 50 player. But if he makes the kind of growth that I expect him to make as a senior, he's going to be an easy 5. I mean, and he's really close to getting that 5-star. In my 5 stars, it's based on a point system. I have 8 different categories, and it's a different category for each position, but they kind of fall into 3 different groupings. So there's a couple size, strength, frame, body type things. There's a couple athleticism things. There's a couple skill things, and then there's some intangible type of things that factor into that position. And then I, give you a grade based on a scale of 60 to 100, and then that's how I come up with my grade. So it's what I have done to try to protect myself against certain biases that I have as a player, and it airs as an evaluator. And everybody has biases. Some guys like bigger guys, some guys like faster guys, some guys like, all types of different biases that you don't really know. And I found after 5 or 6 years that I was missing on certain positions or certain types of players consistently. And then you kind of realize, okay, I have a bias. So what do I do to avoid that? And so that's why I came up with the grading system. And he is just outside the 5-star grade at this point in time. All righty. David Sauer, any good recruiting stories from past classes involving Notre Dame staff? Yeah, I have a good one. And I think I can share this now. I won't say the coach's name, but there was a player that was committed to Notre Dame that USC was trying to flip. And this is way back early in Kelly's tenure. And he was doing a visit with the USC. It was during official visit season. He was doing a visit with USC. And the USC staff was purposely prolonging their visit because they knew that a Notre Dame assistant coach was coming to visit afterwards. And the assistant coach is trying to call this player, and he's like, hey, where are you at? What's going on? We're supposed to meet. And somehow the kid kind of sent him a text like, hey, coach, I'm here with USC, and they're kind of not letting me leave. Like they're, they won't let me, not that they were holding him hostage or anything like that, but like they were purposely prolonging and so all that stuff. So then the coach from Notre Dame was like, well, where are you at? And he told him where he was at. And so basically the Notre Dame coach shows up at the restaurant, and let's just say their visit with that player ended pretty quickly. And he ended up having his visit with Notre Dame and ended up signing with Notre Dame. So I thought that was a pretty savage move by that coach. But, yeah, that's probably about the only one that I could probably share. There was a recent top recruit that one of the coaches took a really bold strategy on when he was leaning towards another school. He kind of did a pretty bold strategy to convince the kid to come back. Totally ethical. It was a really good, savvy move, and he got the kid to go back. So it was really good. Tom Balork, best ND show on the web. Thanks, Tom. I really appreciate that. Really appreciate that. Chad Williams says, parents annoy me as well. Former D1 player and college coach, couldn't do it anymore. Look, most parents I've come in contact with have been awesome, but you get some that just drive you nuts. I was my second year as a coach. I coached that year. We won 10 games. We went to the national college playoffs, went to the D3 national playoffs for the first time in school history. Won 10 games for the first time in school history. I coached running backs. Our running back was an All-American that year, Conference Player of the Year, set school record for all-purpose yards and touchdowns. After just about every game, my fourth-string running back's dad would like follow me all around, kind of talking to me about why his kid wasn't playing. I'm just like, we just won 43-0. My running back ran for over 200 yards, and you want to know why your kid's not playing? Because he's not that guy. And so, yeah, parents can kind of get you there. Let's see here. Brent Byers says, with how good 22 is looking, it seems like 2023 might be even better. It has a chance. Now, again, they're a long way away from that. They don't have anybody in the class yet from there, but yeah, they're a long way away from that. But the guys are on the board certainly for that, and it's loaded at some very important positions like quarterback. Absolutely. Christopher says Notre Dame didn't even have a training table in Urban chose Florida. Notre Dame didn't have a training table when Brian Kelly was hired. They were so far behind the 8 ball on that one. And they're still behind the 8 ball on some nutrition stuff that needs to get fixed as well. But Charlie did a lot of things. But, yes, Notre Dame just was not willing to compete financially or with those type of things when Urban Meyer was going through the process. Charlie helped kick some of those things down, but it wasn't really until Jack Swarbrick arrived that those things really changed. And certainly Brian Kelly's had a role in that as well. Let's see here. Matt D, like, subscribe, share, and follow the Facebook page. Yeah, we have it's Irish Breakdown / Notre Dame Fighting Irish fan page that we talk. And until we get a message board, that's where the only place we can really talk, like as far as writing back and forth and answering questions, things like that. So, yeah, but hopefully we get some good news on that pretty soon. Preston says, do you like Agu and Aiden better than DJ Weslock? Yeah, I do. And I said it at the time before they committed. Once I saw Darren Agu, I was like, they got to get this kid. I was actually concerned that when they offered him, I was like, what? Why are they offering this kid? Like, he's, I've never heard of this kid before. And then I watched the film and I was like, okay, I get why they offered him. And I was actually nervous that they were going to still take DJ and potentially lose Darren because they had been on DJ so long, but they made the decision to flip the switch and got Darren Agu. And I think that was a huge, a very important move for Notre Dame, because I think Darren Agu has as much upside as any defensive end in the class, if not more. Kai S says, any chance Caden Saunders becomes a flip candidate? I noticed a great connection with Angeli and would love Sanders in the slot. I don't see that happening. And honestly, I like Turner Bradshaw better. The Notre Dame staff doesn't, but I think that's a mistake. I would take, if I could have him or Xavion Bradshaw or Caden Saunders, I'd take Xavion Bradshaw. But he's not coming to Notre Dame. Tavis McKay says, what are your thoughts on Notre Dame chances to win the College World Series for baseball? I honestly don't know. I don't follow the other programs enough. I follow Notre Dame, and that's it. I'll tell you what, though, they have been absolutely dominant in the postseason so far. And the only game they lost to Mississippi State the other day, they shouldn't have lost that game. They gave that game away. They committed like 4 errors, which is very not typical for Notre Dame. And if they don't commit those errors last night with that dominant performance, they're already advanced to the College World Series. I just don't know what other teams have. I couldn't tell you what Stanford has or Texas has or NC State has or anything like that. So those are teams I believe that advanced so far. But I couldn't take. I follow them, I follow Notre Dame, but other than that, I just don't follow the game enough to really have an idea. John A1's 32, Larry is 72, Jonathan is 26, Old Grim is 69. Grim, that's actually a little younger than I thought you were going to be because your name is Old Grim. Louis, who is in the show for the first time or commented the first time, is 28. Let's see here. Michael Hughes says, when Jalen Sneed is ready to move on from Notre Dame, I think he picks the Irish, of course. Is he closer to the player Jalen Smith or J.O.K. were entering their NFL careers without considering injuries? I think he'll be closer to Jalen Smith from a type of, again, not top 5 NFL draft pick, which is what I think Jalen would have been if he didn't get injured. But I mean, more stuff. I think he'll be closer to like 230 plus. I think he'll eventually be more of an inside guy than a rover like Jeremiah Wusu. I think Jalen Sneed is a rover more in the Drew Tranquil type with some good coverage ability than he is Jeremiah Wusu-Koramoah. I think he's more of a linebacker that can play rover as opposed to a rover who could eventually grow into a linebacker. I think he's a very, very talented player. John A1 says, I keep forgetting we're talking about high school juniors. Just goes to show how coaches have had to build bonds with a young man and be a part of his development into adulthood. Yeah, it really is a big part of that. There's no question about it. Notre Dame 2164 is 38. All right. You're a young buck. Matt D says, under Weiss, players were losing an average of 15 pounds as the season went on. I remember that specifically. That was a big issue for Notre Dame until Matt Balis came along as well. And there was a lot of reasons for it. But I remember listening to players talk about, there were players, and this is one of the reasons when, like in 2015, when I was like, there's some problems in the program. Yeah, they're winning games because they're very talented, but there's some problems in the program. And we caught a lot of flack for it. But I was hearing from players about there were Notre Dame players. This is in 2015 and 2016 especially, that were getting gym memberships to local gyms because they didn't feel they were getting enough work at Notre Dame with the strength program, which is a big reason why you've seen under Matt Balis just explosion of these guys taking off. Guys that, were – I mean, it's the same kind of players, but now you're seeing Notre Dame every year. Some Notre Dame player goes to the combine and like, wow, I didn't realize that guy was that athletic, and it's because they're finally in a strength program that's getting the most out of them. Matt Balis has done a great job of that. There's still a lot of things they need to do from a nutrition standpoint, but it's certainly been a big thing, no question about it. Matt Last, this is a great question. Would you rather have Tobias and CJ or Tobias and Xavier? Honestly, I'd rather have Tobias and Xavier, and it's not because I don't think CJ Williams is a great player. I think CJ Williams is a very good player. It's that I fully believe that in order to have the type of receiving core Notre Dame needs, they need to have a greater diversity of skills. They can't just have 2 power forwards outside and 2 tight ends and then expect to be able to be an explosive offense against Ohio State and Alabama and Clemson, teams like that. You have to have a better mix of talent. And Xavier Bradshaw and Tobias Merriweather bring you a different style of player. Whereas with Tobias, CJ, and Maureen Walker, it's 3 guys that are sort of similar in how they attack teams. Now, they all have different strengths, but they're all vertically oriented players. There's nobody say, hey, that guy's a slot, that guy can do screens, that guy can turn a quick throw into a big play, that guy can go return punts. None of those guys can do that, and that's why I think it's very important that Notre Dame be able to bring in a more diverse group of players at receiver. I think it's very, very important. Brian Denbo said it's 47. So earlier we were at, somebody asked about the average age, so that's why. Larry says Grimm's not old. I'm not commenting on that one, buddy. Nate Bryan says, hey, any update on OVs in that home playoff game? I think that atmosphere would be electric and could attract some high-end talent. That's a good question. And I haven't had a chance to think about that because it's still a few years down the road. I will get to that some point in time, but I have not had a chance to get to that. I think that was like late last week we talked about that. And any conversation I've had with anybody at Notre Dame, I tried to stick to what was going on this weekend. But we'll get to that. All right, let's see here. Make sure you also follow Brian on Twitter for the latest. I appreciate that, D-Rock. Appreciate that very much. Righty. Matt D says Paul Longo appeared to stop working at the end. It wasn't really that. He was battling some health problems at the time, I believe. Yeah, and Chad Williams says he had a lot of personal issues that affected his job. That is absolutely correct. That's absolutely correct. Matt D says CJ and Tobias are big men, and Bradshaw is a smaller, faster receiver. Exactly, and that's kind of why I like that combination of the type of players. All right, Chad Williams says Brian Smith was one player who complained about the nutrition. There were a lot. He was just one of the ones that did it in more public fashion, but there were a lot. And then last question here, John Long. Yes, I made a live chat. You got in late, John, but you made it, and that's the important thing. You made it. And then Roderick Blackman says, "Who do you think commits first after this weekend?" I'm not saying that one. That would kind of give it away. I think that they're going to get some kids relatively soon. That's what I'll say. John Long says, please tell me you are aware of a silent commit from a gap closer. Yes, I am. All righty. Okay, that's going to be it for today's show. So that's going to wrap it up here. I've got to cut it. I got an interview I got to do here in about 15 minutes with somebody from this weekend. So hopefully that we're going to be able to get some more information for you. I'm going to keep digging about the just kind of how this weekend went. And we'll keep trying to figure out, just get some more info on how things are going to go. And appreciate everybody joining the show today. Before you leave, please hit the like button. Please hit the subscribe button. Please make sure that you follow our channel, but also hit the notifications bell so that way you know when we're going to do a show. If you have not subscribed to our Facebook page, I see that a couple people have sent requests. I just went in and approved a couple people. So Brent, you are now in our group, but that's where we're going to be chatting for now, where I'll be put all of our articles that we post. We'll put our videos up when we have them. And then of course I engage and I talk to people on there, and then Matt D kind of helps me a little bit as a mod there. But hopefully we'll be getting a message board soon. I got some good news on that this week. I don't really dive into it because we've gotten good news before. It hasn't worked out. So hopefully I'll have some good news for you all very soon. And we'll be able to get that going. And then we'll have some offers for y'all when we really get that rolling. So thanks so much for joining the show. We'll be back again tomorrow talking some team stuff. We're going to have some interesting stuff coming up this week. And then next week, we're going to launch our new schedule and some new features that we're really, really excited about. So appreciate everybody being with us today. Stay safe, and we'll talk to you again very, very soon.